The first time I saw my grandson sprint the length of a soccer field, I understood two things at once. He was not dying, and my daughter had built her whole life on that lie. By the time Noah cut past the last defender and drove the ball low into the left corner of the net, I had already paid $196,000 to keep a healthy boy sick. I can still see the whole afternoon with a kind of cruel clarity. The hard white lines on the field, the wet smell of cut grass, the little aluminum bleachers shaking when parents shifted their weight, the sharp whistle from the coach, a woman 2 rows up unwrapping peppermint gum. The number 14 on the back of the jersey Noah had hidden under a gray hoodie the second he spotted me. He was 13 years old then, longer legs than I was prepared for, my son-in-law's height in the making, my wife Ellen's eyes, and he ran like no child with a fragile heart had any business running. He did not stumble. He did not clutch his chest. He did not turn pale and collapse the way Rachel had trained all of us to fear. He ran like a boy who had been starving for motion. When the game ended, he did not celebrate with the others. He looked straight at me through the chain-link fence, and all the color drained out of his face. That was the second moment that changed everything. He did not look guilty because he had broken a rule. He looked terrified because he had been seen. I waited by the side gate while the other boys laughed and shoved each other toward their parents and water bottles and ordinary, noisy lives. Noah took longer than everyone else. He disappeared behind the storage shed near the bleachers and came out 2 minutes later wearing his school sweater, his hair combed down with wet fingers, his chest still lifting too fast from the game. "Grandpa," he said, and his voice came out in that careful little tone children use when they have learned that even the weather can get adults in trouble. "You weren't supposed to be here." I should probably tell you who I am before I tell you what I said next. My name is Benjamin Mercer. Most people call me Ben. I was 69 years old that afternoon, a retired union electrician living in a small Pennsylvania town where people still bring peach cobbler to funerals and still wave when they pass houses they've never entered. My wife Ellen had been dead for 5 years. My daughter Rachel lived in the big white farmhouse my wife and I bought in 1989. Her fiancé, Mason Pike, lived there too, though nobody ever said it quite that directly in church because people like to keep pretending words still matter after behavior has already made the decision for them. And Noah, my only grandchild, was supposed to be too sick to run. Not just run. Too sick for gym class. Too sick for sleepovers. Too sick for birthday parties that got too loud. Too sick for stairs on bad days. Too sick for long car rides unless the monitoring kit came along. Too sick for his father's custody visits unless Rachel approved every detail first. For 7 years, that had been the story. A rare cardiac condition. Episodes, restrictions, private consultations, uncovered treatments, a winter monitoring plan in Connecticut, 2 emergency evaluations in Baltimore, medication changes, school accommodations, special meal plans, stress precautions, and every December, another transfer from me into the account Rachel said kept Noah stable. $28,000, sometimes more, always urgent, always justifiable, always wrapped in the kind of careful, frightened language that makes a grandfather feel like the smallest hesitation might kill the child he loves. Noah stood in front of me outside that fence with his backpack hanging from one shoulder and his soccer cleats still half visible in the open top, and all of that collapsed in one ugly, silent rush. "You're not supposed to be running," I said. I meant it as a question. It came out like a confession. He looked over both shoulders before answering. Not for coaches, not for classmates, for his mother. "I know," he whispered. "Please don't tell Mom you saw me." There are sentences that make a man angry. There are sentences that make him afraid. And then there are sentences that make him feel, all at once, like an accomplice who just found out what crime he's been helping to pay for. "Why would I not tell your mother?" I asked. His fingers tightened around his bag strap. He looked so much younger in that second than he had on the field. "Because if she knows I played, she'll say I ruined everything again." Again. That word hit me first. Then he leaned closer and said the line that still wakes me up sometimes. "She says your heart can't take the truth." I stared at him. The field sounds kept going around us. Another practice starting on the lower side. A parent yelling for somebody named Tyler to get his water bottle. The coach folding cones into a mesh bag. But the world around me had already changed shape. "My heart," I repeated. Noah nodded. "Mom says if you knew I was okay, the stress would kill you because of Grandma and all the money and Dad and everything." Dad, Daniel, my former son-in-law, Rachel's ex-husband. The man she said had never understood Noah's condition, had always pushed too hard, had always made things worse. The man I had not spoken to in almost 4 years because Rachel had taught me to hear recklessness every time he asked for proof. I looked at Noah for a long time before I trusted myself to speak. "Buddy," I said, keeping my voice low, "are you okay right now?" He nodded once. "Really okay?" Another nod. Then after a second, a smaller one. Like he was afraid the first had been too honest. That was the moment I knew the lie was not just about money. Money matters. Of course it does. When you're old enough, money becomes time, heat, medicine, roofing repairs, the difference between private grief and public dependence. But if this had only been about money, Rachel would have asked for cash and invented 1 or 2 dramatic emergencies a year. What she had built was bigger than that. Cleaner, longer, more organized. A whole life structured around keeping a healthy child careful, frightened, and useful. I wish I could tell you I understood everything right there beside the field. I did not. What I understood was simpler and more humiliating. My grandson was not as sick as I had been told. He was afraid of being caught doing something normal, and my daughter had somehow convinced him that truth itself was dangerous. Before this story is over, I'm going to tell you how I learned the monitor hanging beside Noah's bed had not been plugged into anything in 3 years, why my daughter kept a locked file box under the floorboards in the linen closet, what I found in the binder labeled Winter Protocols, and how I waited until Rachel's biggest charity dinner of the year to take the microphone out of her hands and give her applause to the police. But to understand why that afternoon on the soccer field felt like the ground opening under me, you need to understand the kind of family we had been before Rachel learned how profitable fear could be. I was not a dramatic man. I'm still not, if I can help it. I spent 41 years pulling wire through half-finished buildings, crawling through crawl spaces, standing on ladders in January, and fixing other people's bad planning for decent hourly pay. Electricians do not get rich in the movies the way stockbrokers do, but a good union electrician with steady work, a practical wife, and one house paid over a long enough stretch can build something solid. That was my life with Ellen, solid. She taught high school English for 26 years. Not the glamorous kind teachers talk about in movies either. The real kind. Tired feet, red pens, parent emails, school plays nobody funded properly, teenagers who thought sarcasm was a personality. And yet she could come home, kick off her shoes in the mudroom, tie her hair back, and make the whole house feel calmer in under 10 minutes. She had this habit of touching doorframes when she passed through them. Not everyone. Just some. Kitchen, bedroom, front hall, like she was checking in with the house itself. After she died, I would sometimes catch myself doing it and stop halfway, angry for reasons I could not even name. Ellen understood people faster than I did. That is not always a gift. Sometimes it just means you spend more of your life disappointed. When Rachel was little, Ellen used to say our daughter never lied the way other children lied. Rachel did not deny the broken lamp if she thought denying it would fail. She built better stories, stories with just enough truth stitched into them to make correction feel mean. At 8, she cried because a neighbor accused her of stealing cherries from a tree 2 houses down. I found the stained t-shirt hidden under her bed that evening. When I confronted her, she said very calmly, "I didn't steal them. I just picked them before he offered." That was Rachel, even then. Not wild, not sloppy, not vicious in the obvious ways people like to believe evil announces itself. She was composed, bright, pretty, good at reading a room, good at knowing how much emotion to use and when to stop. Too much crying looked fake. No tears looked cold. Rachel learned young that 1 clean tear and a cracked voice could move an adult faster than 10 good arguments. Ellen saw it. I mostly saw a smart little girl who would outgrow the rough edges. Maybe that was my first real failure as a father. Thinking manipulation was just immaturity with better grammar. Our son never existed. That may sound like a strange thing to say in the middle of a story about my daughter and grandson, but people make assumptions when they hear old men talk. So let me be clear. Rachel was our only child, which meant all our hope, all our worry, all our amateur parenting experiments and apologies and second chances landed on one person. Sometimes I think only children get more credit for depth than they deserve because there is no sibling nearby to keep the family honest. Rachel was bright in school, beautiful in the effortless, infuriating way young women sometimes are. One of those girls adults called mature because she could hold a conversation at church suppers and thank older people for gifts she clearly hated. She met Daniel Cole in community college. He was studying HVAC. Strong shoulders, quiet voice, good hands, the sort of young man who fixed his own truck because he did not trust dealerships and who looked you in the eye when he answered questions. I liked him right away. Ellen did too, though she liked him with caution, which in hindsight should probably have told me something. They married at 23. Too young, probably. But young marriages can work if both people are humble or both are stubborn in complementary directions. Rachel and Daniel were stubborn in opposing directions. Daniel believed problems should be named plainly. Rachel believed plain naming was just another form of aggression when it did not go her way. For the first 2 years, they held together well enough. They rented a little townhouse near Carlisle. Daniel worked long hours. Rachel bounced through administrative jobs and posted filtered photos of centerpieces, pancakes, anniversaries, and calm that rarely lasted longer than the upload. Then Noah was born. He was one of those babies who made everybody else look clumsy. Not because he was easy, he was not. He had lungs like a trial lawyer and a talent for waking exactly when adults sat down to eat. But from the beginning, he watched people with a strange, sober attention, as if he had already realized most adults were improvising and found the whole performance mildly concerning. Ellen adored him. Absolutely adored him. There's a photo on my mantle now of Ellen sitting cross-legged on our living room rug in one of my old gray sweatshirts, Noah leaning against her knees, both of them looking off camera towards some sound I cannot remember anymore. He is maybe 10 months old in that picture. She is laughing. That picture still hurts to look at. I never move it. When Noah was 3, his pediatrician heard a murmur during a routine appointment. That was the first seed. It should have stayed a seed. The cardiologist said it looked innocent, common. Monitor it. Nothing alarming. No major restrictions. Just keep an eye on fatigue, fainting, anything unusual. Normal caution, measured, adult. Rachel heard something else. She heard narrative. For a year or so, nothing much came of it. Noah ran, climbed, fell, got back up, skinny knees, grass stains, birthday cake in his hair, the ordinary wear and tear of being a little boy. Then Daniel and Rachel started fighting harder. About money, mostly. Then parenting. Then respect. Then the way most marriages finally deteriorate, where the original issue no longer matters, because the daily interpretation of every sentence has already turned poisonous. Daniel said Rachel wanted emergencies. Rachel said Daniel minimized everything because admitting fear would make him feel weak. They came to our house after one fight and stayed 4 nights in separate rooms while Noah, 4 years old and confused, kept asking why Daddy was sleeping where Grandma kept the winter blankets. They reconciled, then split again, then reconciled, then split for good. The official divorce came through when Noah was 6. Rachel told us Daniel was impossible. Daniel told me Rachel made peace expensive. I was too tired by then to know which sentence contained more truth. Then 6 months after the divorce, Noah collapsed at school during a field day relay. That was the second seed, the one Rachel needed. The school called 911 because collapsed child is the kind of phrase that makes institutions panic before facts catch up. At the ER, Noah had dehydration, low blood sugar, and a bruised knee. The cardiology follow-up found no catastrophic condition. A lingering tendency toward vasovagal episodes, some caution, hydration, regular meals, monitoring if symptoms repeated, again, ordinary, manageable. No child should have had his future rearranged around that report. Rachel rearranged it anyway. By the time she was done telling it, the school collapse had almost killed him. There had been whispers of arrhythmia, special concerns, no one willing to say how serious it was, because they always downplay things until something terrible happens. That last phrase became one of her favorites. Doctors downplay, schools miss warning signs, men push too hard, insurance denies what matters, only mothers stay vigilant. If you put enough moral weight inside the word vigilant, you can make almost any controlling behavior sound holy. At first I thought Rachel was overreacting the way young mothers sometimes do. Ellen thought that too. But then Ellen got sick. And once cancer enters a house, everybody's bad timing becomes a weapon. Rachel came around more often, always with folders, always with new information, always with some update about Noah's episodes, Noah's fatigue, Noah's school limitations, Noah's specialists. She sat at our kitchen table while Ellen sipped ginger tea and tried not to wince when the nausea came on. And Rachel spread paper after paper, like a woman building a case before a silent jury. I should have looked closer then. I really should have. But cancer narrows a man. It teaches him to rank disasters. And if one disaster is sleeping in the next room, losing weight by the week, another one can put on a clean blouse, cry at the right time, and quietly install itself as background truth before you ever test it. That was the season Rachel learned how easy I was to manage when I was afraid of losing 2 people at once. When Ellen was first diagnosed, the doctors still used words like hopeful and responsive and treatment path. By the 3rd round, they switched to words like comfort and time and quality. People think the shift from one set of words to the other comes with some dramatic ceremony. It does not. It arrives in offices that smell like printer paper and hand sanitizer, while somebody in a white coat avoids your eyes for half a beat too long. During that year, Rachel became indispensable in all the wrong ways. She drove Ellen to 2 appointments when I was stuck at a commercial rewiring job I could not get out of. She brought soup, she organized pill bottles, she answered calls, she talked to nurses, she sat on the edge of Ellen's bed and stroked her hair. Anybody watching from the outside would have said I was lucky. A daughter like that, attentive, capable, present. And Rachel knew it. She never overplayed kindness when witnesses were around. That would have looked suspicious. She just did enough to become necessary. Then she attached Noah's medical story to that necessity until it felt cruel to separate them. Dad, while we're already at Hershey next week for Mom's imaging, can you cover Noah's specialist consult too? They found something borderline in the last tracing. Dad, can you loan me $3,000 for the cardiac monitor rental? Insurance is playing games. Dad, Daniel thinks I'm being dramatic again. If he pushes too hard and something happens to Noah, I'll never forgive myself. It was always positioned like that. Not demand, not extortion, maternal burden under siege. And Ellen, even while sick, kept watching Rachel the way a person watches a cracked pipe inside the wall. Not because they can see the flood yet, because they can hear the pressure. One night, about 3 months before she died, Ellen and I were lying in bed with the lamp on low and the window cracked because she said chemo made the room feel stale even in January. The house was silent except for the baseboard heat clicking. She was so thin by then her wedding ring slipped when she moved. I remember reaching over and turning it inward on her finger so it would not catch. Then she asked, out of nowhere, "Have you ever seen a cardiologist say Noah can't run?" I turned my head toward her. "What? Have you ever seen it yourself? Not heard Rachel say it? Not heard about a note, not heard about a consult. Have you seen it?" I took too long to answer. That was answer enough, but I gave one anyway. Rachel showed us the restrictions after the field day incident. She showed us a lot of paper. That was Ellen. Even exhausted, still precise. "He does get tired," I said, and I hated how weak it sounded. "All children get tired. Some of them are just less profitable about it." I stared at her. She kept looking at the ceiling. "Ellen, I'm not saying he has nothing. I'm saying Rachel likes conditions that make her central. That's all." I should have listened harder. Instead, I did what men like me do when two truths are competing and one of them would require immediate conflict. I postponed. "Let's get through your scan first," I said. "Then I'll look into all of it." That is one of the ugliest sentences a person can say without raising their voice. Not because it sounds cruel, because it sounds reasonable. Reasonable delay has buried more truth than open malice ever has. Ellen closed her eyes, did not argue. She was too tired. When she died 4 months later, Rachel arrived at the house before the funeral home. She moved quickly, efficiently, beautifully, called people, made coffee, found the black tie I could not find with my own shaking hands, told Noah to use his inside voice, texted the pastor, opened the side door for neighbors bringing food. She held me at the burial with one hand firm on my arm and cried into my shoulder, like the devoted daughter everyone thought she was. Noah stood beside her in a small dark suit, pale and solemn, one hand pressed to his own chest because Rachel had taught him that gesture by then. Not constantly, just enough. A subtle reminder, a sick child's unconscious habit. Daniel came to the funeral alone. He stood in the back at the reception hall and spoke to almost nobody. At one point, he stepped toward Noah with a gift bag, and Rachel turned her whole body between them so smoothly, most people would have thought she was just moving around a table. Later, when I said he had looked awful, Rachel lowered her voice and said, "He keeps trying to act like Noah's restrictions are optional. I can't have him confusing Noah right now." I nodded, because grief had made me smaller, because Ellen was gone, because the house sounded wrong without her, because I had never learned that there are moments when a father needs to stop being tired and start being dangerous. The first year after Ellen's death passed in a kind of organized fog. I still lived in the farmhouse, still woke around 5:30 because my body had done that for 40 years, still drank coffee black, still touched the kitchen doorway once in a while and then stopped halfway, embarrassed by my own hand, still drove into town for groceries, church, the diner, hardware store, all the little errands old men pretend are enough to structure a life. Rachel and Noah came around more often after Ellen died. At first I was grateful. The house was too big, the silence too loud. Noah's sneakers by the mudroom bench, Rachel's purse on the kitchen chair, the sound of a child opening and closing cabinets looking for the cereal he liked. All of it made the place feel less like a museum of one dead woman's habits. Then Rachel's visits stopped feeling like visits. They started feeling like occupation under polite language. "Dad, it's getting hard managing Noah's episodes from town and getting him to specialists. Dad, the rental on our place ends in August and I don't think stress is good for him right now. Dad, I know this house has space, just until things settle. Dad, you shouldn't be alone out here anyway." Just until things settle is one of those phrases that should be outlawed in families. It settled into 3 years, then 5, then more. Rachel moved into the upstairs room that had been mine and Ellen's. Not on day one. She was too smart for that. First, she took the east bedroom with Noah, then said the stairs were easier from the main hall if she had to respond quickly at night. Then said my room had better light for Noah's equipment. Then said, "Dad, you don't need all this space. The downstairs guest room is quieter for you." The downstairs guest room had a twin bed and a radiator that clanged like a wrench dropped down a metal chute. I moved into it because the alternative was conflict, and I was still the sort of man who confused endurance with peace. She put Noah in the room across from her, always close enough to monitor, always close enough to hear, always close enough to keep the performance calibrated. I need you to understand something clearly here. Rachel did not create chaos. That would have alerted people. She created management, pill organizers, symptom charts, school notes, restricted activity sheets on the refrigerator, emergency numbers by the phone, a tote bag hanging by the door labeled Noah. A monthly calendar with appointments written in 3 colors. Cardiac safe snack bins. Hydration reminders. Stress reduction rules. Anybody walking into the house would have thought a devoted mother was doing battle against a difficult medical reality with admirable discipline. That is what made it so effective. It looked like care. Not because it was care. Because Rachel understood that care and control share a lot of visual language. Somewhere during the second year after Ellen died, Mason Pike appeared. At first, he was just Rachel's friend from the supply company. Then he was helping move furniture. Then he was staying late. Then his shaving kit showed up in the upstairs bathroom. Then his boots appeared by the back door and never left again. Mason was one of those men who mistake volume for authority and relaxation for charm. Mid-40s, broad, too much cologne for rural Pennsylvania. Good at smiling with his teeth, bad at smiling with anything else. He sold restaurant supplies until he got fired over commission disputes, which I later learned was Mason's preferred phrase for things other people called cheating. After that, he drifted through odd ventures, ATV resale, sports betting schemes, a friend's landscaping partnership that collapsed after 3 months, a home gym startup in a storage unit. The man had more fresh starts than most people have dress shirts. Rachel said he was helpful, practical, good with stress, not intimidated by Noah's condition. What she meant was this: he did not mind building a life on my money as long as there was enough of it moving. Mason was careful around me at first. "Mr. Mercer, anything from the store?" "Mr. Mercer, let me get that." "Mr. Mercer, you raised a wonderful daughter." By the end of the first year, it became Ben. Then eventually nothing at all, just orders delivered through Rachel. "Ben, Noah needs the humidifier switched." "Ben, we're out of filtered water." "Ben, Mason has an early call, so could you keep the kitchen quiet?" "Ben, try not to upset Noah before his telehealth." Telehealth became one of Rachel's favorite words because it carried all the weight of medicine without requiring any visible doctor. Every few months, she would prop a tablet on the dining room table, close the door, and tell me Noah was in consult. Sometimes I heard nothing behind the door. Sometimes I heard Rachel talking softly. Sometimes Noah answered a question or two. I never once heard a doctor clearly. Not once. At the time, I told myself audio connections were bad, specialists were rushed, medical privacy mattered, all the little excuses people use when doubt would be more painful than compliance. The first big annual transfer came that December. Rachel sat me down with a folder. Inside were invoices for private winter monitoring, travel support, specialist review blocks, cardiac nutrition management, stress-protected tutoring, and an emergency reserve. Total $28,000. "I hate asking like this," she said, tears standing in her eyes in exactly the right amount. "But the insurance appeal failed, and if we lose his slot, I don't know what happens next." I remember looking at the page that said Comprehensive Winter Cardiac Oversight Program and thinking it sounded more like a luxury retreat than medicine. Then I thought of Noah asleep upstairs with the little pulse sensor clipped to his finger that Rachel liked to display when guests were over. Then I thought of Ellen asking whether I had ever actually seen a cardiologist forbid him from running. Then I thought of my wife in a hospice bed telling me, with more energy than she had any right to waste, that Rachel liked conditions that made her central. And still I signed the transfer. Not because I was convinced, because I was bereaved. And bereaved people will pay almost anything to avoid feeling like they failed another person. That first year's transfer bought the system a future. Once a man has paid $28,000 for a child's stability, the next 28 becomes easier. Not financially, morally, it becomes continuity. Proof you are not the sort of grandfather who quits halfway through the hard part. By the third annual transfer, Rachel had added community fundraising. The Noah's Heart Winter Benefit started at church in the fellowship hall, small, a lasagna dinner, silent auction baskets, local band, $5 raffle tickets, a few emotional words about pediatric care gaps and family resilience. The next year it moved to the volunteer fire hall, then to the banquet room at the country club outside town. Bigger donors, printed programs, auctioneer, corporate sponsorship banners, photos of Noah smiling carefully beside a monitor he almost never wore unless other people were looking. I donated every year, publicly. I stood at those events under warm lights and modest applause while Rachel introduced me as the grandfather who has never stopped fighting for this child. That phrase makes me sick now, because I was fighting for him, just not against the right enemy. If you want to know how a lie survives 7 years inside a family, the answer is routine. Not drama, routine. The big emergencies are not actually the strongest parts. They flare up, win attention, and pass. What keeps people inside a false reality is repetition. The water bottles labeled with times. The pills laid out in little cups. The bad days when Noah had to lie on the couch while Rachel lowered the curtains and spoke in a whisper. The restriction notes emailed to teachers. The laminated card in Rachel's wallet listing symptoms. The sigh she gave whenever Noah laughed too hard at something and she had to remind him to watch his heart. Watch his heart. That phrase lived in our house like a second prayer. After a while, Noah started using it too. Not always. Only when Rachel was nearby or when the topic touched anything he wanted badly. Can I ride bikes with Caleb? Depends on your heart. Can I sleep over at Grandpa's room and watch old monster movies? Not if your heart's acting up. Can I go outside? 10 minutes. Watch your heart. He was 7 when the phrase began. 13 when I saw him run. That is a lot of years to spend learning that your body is a threat and joy is a risk. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. Noah rarely complained about pain unless Rachel asked questions in a certain tone. When I was alone with him for short stretches, he forgot to be fragile. He ate fast, talked about animals, built elaborate forts from couch cushions. Once when he was 9, he chased the barn cat halfway across the yard before Rachel's voice cracked through the kitchen window like a whip and stopped him cold. He froze with his hands still out, not because his chest hurt, because he knew he had been seen. Another time, when he was 10, I found him in the garage balancing on an overturned bucket and shooting foam darts into an empty cardboard box with a homemade target taped to it. He had a sweat shine on his forehead and a grin so alive it startled me. "What's all this?" I asked. He jumped so hard he almost fell off the bucket. Then his hand flew to his chest on instinct. Nothing. I was just standing. Children do not teach themselves to erase joy that fast. Someone teaches them. And still I did not act. I noticed. I doubted. I postponed. That became my rhythm as surely as management had become Rachel's. Part of the reason I stayed still was Noah. The other part was Daniel. It is hard to admit how thoroughly I let Rachel narrate that man into exile. Daniel had his faults. Every man does. He could get stubborn to the point of stupidity. He believed that if he repeated a practical point often enough, people would eventually surrender to logic. That works with wiring diagrams. It does not work with emotional manipulators. The first serious custody fight came in Noah's 7th year. Rachel said Daniel kept questioning restrictions in front of the boy, said he took Noah fishing in weather that was too physically stressful, said he let him climb a dock ladder, said he accused her of exaggerating symptoms and reducing Noah to a medical brand. That last part was phrased too perfectly to be Daniel. I know that now. At the time, I heard reckless father versus exhausted mother and put my weight, moral and financial, where Rachel wanted it. Daniel called me twice that spring. I did not answer the first time because I was in the hardware aisle trying to pick between 2 kinds of fence staples, and I told myself I would call back. I did not answer the second time because Rachel had just cried in my kitchen over another appeal letter, and I did not want to hear Daniel make it all harder. He showed up in my driveway once around dusk. Old blue truck, mud on the wheel wells, no coat even though it was chilly. I met him on the porch. "Ben," he said, not angry yet, just tired, "I need you to stop taking Rachel's packet as gospel." That was his exact word. Packet. I should have liked that. A practical man's frustration with paperwork theater. Instead, I bristled. "You think this is theater?" "I think parts of it are. I think Noah had a murmur and a couple feigning episodes, and Rachel turned it into a permanent weather system." I stepped out onto the porch and shut the front door behind me so Noah would not hear. "That is a hell of a thing to say about your own son." Daniel ran a hand over his face. "That's exactly why I'm saying it, because he's my son too. She keeps him scared, Ben. Every time I get near a normal day with him, suddenly there's another specialist note, another event, another 'you can't have him this weekend because his numbers are off.' What numbers? Nobody ever shows me real numbers." Rachel has paperwork. Rachel has copies. He leaned closer. "Have you ever talked to the cardiologist without her in the room?" I said nothing. That told him enough. He shook his head once, not triumphant, just sad. "I know you're grieving. I know she uses that, but she's using him too." There are moments in a man's life when the truth arrives wearing clothes he hates. Sometimes he rejects it for the outfit alone. That's what I did. I told Daniel he was angry because the court had reduced his overnights. I told him he needed to earn trust by following restrictions. I told him Rachel was carrying more than I thought he understood. I told him he did not get to turn my porch into a courtroom. The whole time he kept looking at me like I was stepping backward off a roof and insisting the air felt solid. At the bottom step, he stopped and said, "One day you're going to realize she made your grief useful. I just hope Noah doesn't lose his whole childhood before you do." Then he got in his truck and left. I stood there a long time after the taillights disappeared, not because I thought he might be right, because some part of me already knew he could be. That may be the worst kind of cowardice. Not ignorance, selective delay. After that, Daniel became a name Rachel used like a weather warning. If Noah got quiet after a phone call, it was because Daniel upset him. If a custody hearing came up, Rachel's blood pressure went up and Noah had a bad week. If Daniel asked for updated records, Rachel cried. If Daniel pressed for a second opinion, Rachel called it harassment. If he missed a support payment because the heating business had a slow month, Rachel called him cruel. Cruel men are easy to hate. Complicated men are easy to outsource. Rachel made sure Daniel stayed in the second category until he finally seemed like the first. Meanwhile, Mason settled into the house like mold finds damp. He never contributed visibly enough for anyone to point to a real role. He just existed around things. At breakfast, in the den, in the driveway polishing a pickup truck he absolutely could not have afforded on his own. At the counter opening packages Rachel said came from cardiac suppliers, even though half of them looked suspiciously like sporting goods or electronics. By year 4, Mason had a black side-by-side in the barn, a gym bench in the outbuilding, and a silver SUV Rachel claimed was safer for Noah's transport. The old kitchen got a quartz countertop nobody had asked me about. The upstairs bathroom developed heated floors. Rachel started wearing small gold pieces that looked expensive in the specific understated way women wear things when they want to appear tasteful, not flashy. I noticed all of it. But every time I noticed, Rachel had another explanation ready. Grant money. A donor covered it. Mason's friend gave him a deal. The remodel was cheaper than expected. Noah's specialist suggested safer temperature control. Auction proceeds helped. Community generosity. Community generosity. That one still turns my stomach. Because the town gave, Lord, they gave. Baskets, checks, Venmo transfers, gift cards, quilt raffle proceeds. A local car dealership sponsored one gala. A dentist's office paid for oxygen support. The women's auxiliary made Noah a fleece blanket with blue hearts stitched into the corners. The school held a hat day fundraiser. People dropped envelopes into my church coat pocket after services and whispered, "For the boy." And Rachel took it all with damp eyes and perfect gratitude. That is the thing about certain predators. They do not look greedy while they are taking. They look burdened. Which makes decent people line up to help them carry what they themselves are enlarging. As Noah got older, Rachel adjusted the performance. Young children are easy to stage with blankets and flushed cheeks. Teenagers are harder. They start having opinions, angles, reflexes of resistance. So Rachel shifted from visible fragility to managed unpredictability. Noah was no longer always weak. He was stable when closely managed. He was high-functioning on good days. He was not a typical case. He was more vulnerable to exertion spikes than outsiders realize. That language let her explain away almost anything. If he laughed too hard at church one Sunday, it was a good day. If he looked pale the next, it was the cost of pushing. If he seemed taller and stronger in family photos, it was because careful care was working. If he wanted more freedom, it was because teenagers hate being different and sometimes endanger themselves. Every possible contradiction had an emotional frame ready. I kept paying. Every December, sometimes early. Once in November because Rachel said the winter block rate would rise. Once in 2 transfers because she wanted the accounting cleaner for Noah's support trust. There was no actual trust. I found that out much later. At the time, I just thought trust sounded more organized than account. It was not just the money either. I gave time, space, authority, benefit of the doubt. My own house. I changed my routines because Mason worked late and Noah needed calm mornings. I stopped inviting old friends over because Rachel said too much stimulation through Noah's sleep. I quit asking questions when Noah missed one more school trip or one more birthday because Rachel always had the same exhausted, righteous expression waiting for me. The one that said, "You are free to challenge me if you are prepared to take responsibility for what happens next." That expression is where a lot of family crimes live. Not in rage, in delegated guilt. Then there was the monitor. You've probably been wondering about that since I mentioned it. For years, Rachel kept a portable cardiac monitor mounted on a white charging cradle beside Noah's bed. Clear tubing, tiny lid wires in a mesh pouch, small digital face, beige case. Very medical looking without being dramatic enough to invite too many questions. Guests noticed it. That was partly the point. "Please don't touch that," Rachel would say if somebody got too curious. "It syncs overnight." Overnight. Another beautiful vague word means enough to impress, not enough to test. One Sunday after church, when Noah was 11, I went upstairs to leave a bag of peaches from the farm stand outside his room. He was downstairs in the den with Rachel and a couple from church who had come to talk benefit logistics. His door was half open. The monitor was on the stand by the bed, a little green light glowing on the lower right corner. I set the peaches down, started to leave, then stopped. Electricians notice cords. We can't help it. A life of tracing current teaches you to see what is connected, what is staged, what is impossible. The monitor cord looped behind the nightstand and down toward the outlet, but it did not actually go into the outlet. It disappeared behind the furniture and curled back on itself. The green light was battery, not charging, not syncing, just on. I stood there longer than I should have. Then I heard Rachel's voice downstairs laugh softly at something, and I did what I had been doing for years. I filed the detail away instead of detonating it. That night I moved the nightstand with my foot when nobody was looking. The cord ended in nothing. A dead connector head taped under the back edge with beige medical tape. The whole setup was display. I remember gripping the edge of the nightstand so hard my fingers hurt. Then I heard Noah on the stairs. I shoved the nightstand back, closed the drawer I had not meant to open, walked out into the hall. That should have been the day I tore the house apart. Instead, it became one more secret I carried alone, because I still could not face what it would mean to name the whole thing. If the monitor was fake, then the rest might be too. If the rest might be too, then I had not just been fooled. I had helped build the lie around Noah by refusing each smaller chance to stop it. Shame makes cowards out of grown men faster than fear does. I know because I lived it. After the soccer field, I did not drive straight home. That would have been normal. Normal was dangerous because normal would have put Rachel in the kitchen within 20 minutes, asking if traffic was bad and whether I could stop by the pharmacy tomorrow for Noah's magnesium chews. So I drove, past the fire station, past the diner, past the cemetery where Ellen was buried under a flat stone that had started sinking slightly on the left side, past the feed store, out toward the old orchard road where the houses got farther apart and the shoulders narrowed. I drove until the town stopped offering me excuses not to think. Then I pulled onto a gravel overlook above a field of winter wheat and shut the truck off. Silence in a truck cab is never really silent. There's always cooling metal, ticking, the seat springs settling, a distant dog, wind on glass. I sat there with both hands on the steering wheel and tried to decide whether I was a fool or a criminal. Because if Rachel had lied about Noah's condition, I had funded the lie for 7 years. I had defended it. I had let it restructure my grandson's life. I had pushed away his father. I had accepted every explanation that cost me less emotionally than confrontation. And if she had not lied, if I had somehow misunderstood what I saw, then I was about to become the reckless old man Rachel always hinted I might be. Either way, the ground under my feet felt rotten. I called no one that evening. Not Rachel, not Noah, not Daniel, not the police, not my pastor, not even Ruth Bartlett, the one person in town with enough legal training and enough contempt for theatrical people to have been useful from the beginning. I went home, microwaved soup I did not taste, and sat in Ellen's old reading chair until after midnight. At some point, I took out the folder Rachel had left on the sideboard 3 days earlier, the one for this year's gala. The Noah's Heart winter benefit had grown so much by then it came with sponsorship tiers. Silver donor, gold donor, legacy donor. Legacy donor meant your name appeared on the back cover of the program, and Rachel thanked you from the stage. That year, she expected me to underwrite The Room and the lead appeal, $45,000. Bigger than before because Noah was approaching a critical age window, and new specialist coordination would require immediate commitments. The amount had unsettled me when I first saw it. Now it looked like a dare. The program included a photo of Noah in a blue sweater, seated by the window in our den with a blanket over his legs and a book in his hands. He looked pale and thoughtful and a little sad, not because he was ill, because Rachel had become very good at photographing obedience. Below the picture was the line that snapped something cleanly inside me. Every gift protects Noah's future. No, every gift had protected Rachel's story. I spent the next 2 hours pulling every folder I had ever kept on Noah out of the hall cabinet. Old cardiology notes, insurance denials, travel receipts, specialist summaries, benefit budgets, letters from the school, Rachel's handwritten symptom logs, 12 different versions of the same careful emergency explanation. Once I started reading with suspicion instead of surrender, little things began flashing red. 2 specialist summaries used identical wording 3 years apart, right down to a typo in activity stabilization. One invoice listed a Connecticut monitoring suite but used a local billing zip code. A hospital logo looked slightly stretched in one corner. A cardiac nutrition receipt came from a corporate accounting service in New Jersey, not a medical practice. One letter referred to Noah as 10 years old when he was 11. Nothing alone was enough. Together, they looked like a system built by somebody who counted on grief and urgency to keep people from comparing pages side by side. At 1 a.m, I found an old envelope in the back of the drawer. Inside was the original pediatric cardiology note from after Noah's school collapse. The real one, not a photocopy Rachel had annotated. The actual intake follow-up. I knew it was original because Ellen had underlined a sentence in pencil. No evidence at present of structural heart disease requiring long-term activity restriction. I read that line so many times the words stopped looking like language. Then I saw Ellen's tiny note in the margin. Ask again when Rachel isn't in room. I sat at the table with that paper in my hands and let the shame roll through me. Ask again when Rachel isn't in room. My wife had not just doubted, she had left me a breadcrumb. A small, quiet instruction from the period when she still had strength to think clearly and I still had time to be useful. I had ignored it for almost 6 years. By dawn, I had made one decision. No more private doubt, no more solitary shame, no more waiting for the next clean excuse to act. If I was going to blow up my daughter's life, I needed facts strong enough to survive my own fear. So at 7:30 the next morning, I called Ruth Bartlett. Ruth had been Ellen's college roommate for 1 semester before Ellen transferred. They stayed friends for 40 years because both women liked sharp edges and distrusted anybody too pleased with themselves. Ruth was 67 then. a widow, former family law attorney. Still did consulting when she felt like it, and still terrified half the county because she could smile while asking a question that made grown men lose color. She answered on the second ring. "If this is a fundraising request," she said, "I'm converting religions." "It's me." A beat of silence. Then her tone changed. "What happened?" "I should tell you what kind of person Ruth is. There was no hello, Ben, no how are you." She heard my breathing and went straight to the structural question. "What happened?" So I told her enough to get her moving. "Can you come over?" I said, "and bring whatever version of yourself is least patient." She arrived in 25 minutes with her hair pinned up, a legal pad under her arm, and 2 blueberry muffins she claimed were from a bakery but looked suspiciously homemade. She walked into my kitchen, took one look at the spread of papers across the table, and said, "Well, either you're finally leaving the church or Rachel's story leaked." I handed her the original cardiology note first. She read the underlined sentence. "Read Ellen's pencil note, read the date." Then she looked up at me. "How long have you had this?" "Since before Ellen died. I forgot it was there." "You didn't forget," she said gently enough to hurt. "You postponed being the person it required." That was Ruth. Never cruel for performance, only accurate. For the next 3 hours we went through everything. I told her about the soccer field, about Noah whispering that Rachel said the truth would kill me, about Daniel's old warning, about the fake monitor, about the annual transfers, about the benefit money, about Mason's truck and the quartz countertops and the heated bathroom floors, and every other luxury that had arrived wrapped in community generosity. Ruth listened with her head slightly tilted, and her pen moving in small, furious strokes. At some point she asked the question I should have expected. "Have you ever spoken directly to a cardiologist without Rachel in the room?" "No." "Have you ever personally paid a hospital or specialist?" "No. Rachel always said centralized billing kept it cleaner." "Have you ever visited the supposed winter monitoring program in Connecticut?" "No." "Have you ever seen Noah collapse when Rachel wasn't the first one narrating it?" That one took longer. Then I said quietly, "No." She set her pen down. "All right," she said. "Then we start with records and the child, not Rachel. People like Rachel hear accusations as an invitation to improve the performance." That sentence alone was worth every year of Ruth's law school debt. We started with the school. Rachel had always insisted Noah's educational plan was delicate. Reduced physical load, quiet space access, excused absences, remote participation flexibility. I assumed the school file would be packed with restrictions and crisis notes. Ruth did not assume anything. She called the district office, invoked my status as legal property owner, emergency family contact, and financial underwriter for declared accommodations, then used a tone I once heard make a tax assessor apologize for breathing. By lunch, we had an appointment with the middle school principal. Her name was Denise Halpern. Compact woman, no-nonsense haircut, the expression of someone who had spent 20 years telling parents their children were not special enough to skip consequences. She brought in the vice principal and the school nurse. That told me right away the matter was more complicated than a grandfather checking up on a sick child. Noah's file, when Denise placed it on the conference table, was thinner than Rachel's kitchen binders by a shocking amount. Activity modifications requested by parent, hydration access, rest privilege if dizzy, no formal physician restriction on non-contact conditioning, no approved exemption from all physical activity, no district record of severe cardiac emergency protocol beyond parent-submitted notices. I stared at the pages. "What does that mean in English?" I asked. Denise looked at the nurse. The nurse, a broad woman named Carla Stein, with practical shoes and tired eyes, folded her hands. "It means most of the limits we honor for Noah come from Rachel, not from current physician orders." My mouth went dry. "Then why have you been treating him like he could drop dead in gym class?" Carla sighed. "Because when a child tells you his mother says running can kill him, and the parent provides historical cardiology paperwork plus a very detailed symptom narrative, schools tend to lean cautious." Ruth cut in. "Historical as in how old?" Carla pulled a copy from the file. "Most of what we have is derivative, copies of older consults, parent updates, one generic telehealth activity caution from 2 years ago that doesn't actually prohibit all exercise." Ruth asked, "Do you have anything current? Signed, specific, verifiable?" Carla met her eyes. "No." The room went very quiet. Then Denise said something that made my stomach turn harder. "There is another issue." She slid a yellow disciplinary memo across the table. "After-school field access violation. Student observed participating in informal soccer conditioning against parent instructions, 3 months earlier. Then another one, 6 weeks earlier. Then a counselor note. Student expresses distress regarding parent discovering exertion." My fingers went cold. "So you knew," I said. Denise's jaw tightened. "We knew he was running secretly with a few boys after school. We did not know why he was so frightened beyond the medical narrative." Carla looked at me with more pity than I deserved. "He asked me once whether a healthy heart can hurt from pretending too long." That sentence hollowed me out. Ruth took over before I could fall apart in the principal's office. "We need copies of everything," she said. "Also names. Who initiated the informal conditioning?" Denise looked surprised but answered. "Coach Alvarez, volunteer assistant, former college player. She found Noah kicking a ball alone behind the gym last spring." "Kicking well?" Denise actually smiled. "Apparently very well. There is a particular kind of grief reserved for older people who realize life has been happening in secret just a few miles away while they kept funding its opposite. I felt that grief then. Sharp, hot, unforgiving. My grandson had found a piece of himself on a field behind the school, and I had spent months paying for another winter of fear. After the school meeting, Ruth did not let me drive straight home. "Not while you look like that," she said. "Like what?" "Like a man who might either throw up or buy a crowbar." So we went to Stella's diner instead. 2 coffees, egg salad on rye for her. Nothing for me until she bullied me into pie I could not taste. Ruth always believed in feeding people before strategy, not for comfort, for blood sugar. She said more bad family decisions got made on empty stomachs than on full ones. I used to think that was one of her theatrical exaggerations. By then I knew it was probably just math. We sat in the back booth near the pie case while the lunch crowd thinned. "What's next?" I asked. "Medical records," she said. "Rachel won't release them." "Then we do not ask Rachel first." I rubbed both hands over my face. She always said privacy rules made everything hard. Privacy rules are a favorite hiding place for people who count on everyone else being polite. There it was again, that simple gift Ruth had, taking all the swirling moral fog and pinning one clear sentence through it. "We called Hershey first because that was where Noah had gone after the field day collapse years earlier. Then the pediatric cardiology practice Rachel always named most often. Then the specialty center in Baltimore she liked invoking whenever she needed a bigger check." You know what records offices do when someone finally asks the right question with the right authority and enough documentation? They do not gasp. They do not dramatize. They make you hold. They transfer. They verify dates. They ask for fax numbers. They say things like, "I'm not finding an active patient episode under that service code," in tones so calm you almost miss the dynamite inside the sentence. By 4 that afternoon, Ruth had enough to sketch the first real shape of the truth. Noah had been evaluated several times in early childhood for an innocent murmur and later vasovagal fainting. There had been no confirmed severe structural disease, no long-term exercise ban, no winter monitoring program in Connecticut through any recognized affiliated center, no recurring pediatric cardiac treatment block matching Rachel's invoices, no private residential pediatric oversight plan, no active Baltimore specialist file in the name or frequency Rachel had described, some follow-ups, some missed appointments, some parent calls, lots of anxiety documented around maternal concern. That phrase showed up more than once. Maternal concern disproportionate to findings. Disproportionate. There it was in medical language. The clean professional cousin of what Ellen had tried to tell me from a hospice bed. By 6, Ruth had called one more person. A retired cardiac nurse practitioner named Susan Havel, who had worked 2 decades in pediatric cardiology and now lived out near Mount Holly Springs with too many cats and a garden everybody in town pretended not to envy. Susan drove over that evening with a canvas bag full of old habit, notebooks, reading glasses on a chain, a pulse oximeter the size of a clothespin, the smell of lavender hand cream. She sat at my kitchen table and went through every medical page Rachel had ever left in my house. At first she was quiet, then irritated, then angry in the professional way, which is more dangerous than yelling because it usually means the facts are speaking for themselves. "This is old phrasing reused," she said, tapping one page. "This note cites an echocardiogram that would require a follow-up report if the findings were what she implies, but there's nothing attached. This logo is from the practice before they rebranded. This physician hasn't worked there in 3 years. This medication list makes no sense in combination unless someone copied terms without understanding dosing intent." She held up one sheet and looked at me over her glasses. "And this is not a treatment plan. This is parent-generated symptom tracking dressed up to look clinical." I felt something inside me tipping from shame into rage. Not wild rage, not yet, a colder kind. The kind electricians know from tracing a fault inside a wall and realizing the last man who touched it did not just make a mistake. He cut corners knowing someone else would inherit the fire. Susan kept reading. Then she stopped at one of the most recent telehealth summaries. 2 paragraphs. Generic language, activity caution, continued supervision, parent education reinforced. "What?" Ruth asked. Susan looked at the signature line, then at me. "Do you know Dr. Melanie Cho?" "No, because according to this, she has been advising ongoing caution for Noah." I shook my head. Susan took out her phone, typed, waited, and then turned the screen toward us. The real Dr. Melanie Cho was a pediatric cardiologist in Seattle. Rachel had been invoicing me for Pennsylvania telehealth oversight under the reused name of a doctor 3 time zones away. I stared at the page until the letters blurred. "She forged it," I said. Ruth corrected me. "No, she built a paper ecosystem. Forgery is one species inside the zoo. That made Susan laugh once despite herself. Then Susan did something that changed the whole night. She asked a question none of us had touched yet. What is Noah actually taking? The kitchen got quiet, because while I could list invoices and letters and benefits and school accommodations, I could not answer that simple thing. I had seen pill cups, bottles, chews, supplements, packets, but Rachel always handled them, always poured them, always announced them by category, never by molecule. Heart support, electrolytes, calming support, nighttime regulation, inflammation help, not names, effects. Susan looked at us and sighed. If she's been medicating him to match a narrative, that matters a lot. That sentence changed the investigation from money to danger. Money I could handle, shame I deserved, but a child's body altered to preserve a lie? That made my hands curl into fists under the table. Ruth saw it and said, "Not tonight." I looked at her, "Then when?" "When we know enough to move without warning her first." She was right, again. The truth was turning into an awful collection of facts she was right about. So we made a plan. The first part involved Noah. Not accusations, observation. Susan volunteered to see him, not as an investigator, as an old friend of Ellen's dropping by with zucchini bread and nosy opinions about boys getting too tall too fast. The second part involved Daniel. Not because I was ready to apologize. Because the closer I got to the truth, the more impossible it became to ignore the years I had let Rachel use her child's supposed illness to keep his father on the far side of locked gates. The third part involved money. Ruth wanted every transfer, every check, every benefit deposit I could document, every receipt tied to the house upgrades, every sponsorship, every restricted use, donation Rachel had praised God for and then quietly repurposed into stone countertops and a luxury SUV. I spent the next 2 days pulling boxes from the attic, files from the office, old bank statements from the safe, and digital transfer histories from my desktop computer. By the time I was done, my dining table looked like a small-town auditor had decided to ruin Christmas. Some patterns were obvious immediately. Every December, transfer from me hit Rachel's account within 48 hours of a medical urgency. Within 2 weeks, large personal purchases followed. Vehicle down payment, home improvement vendor, boutique charge, vacation rental under Mason's email, cash withdrawals, auction display deposits, then the community money, ticket sales from benefits, silent auction proceeds, corporate sponsor checks, direct online donations through a fundraising platform Rachel administered personally. She had publicly described them as dedicated funds for Noah's treatment. Privately, they moved with very little dedication toward anything except Rachel's convenience. There is no sound quite like your own printer spitting out proof that love has been converted into expense categories. On the third night after the soccer field, Susan came over after visiting the house. She did not sit down immediately. That told me whatever she had learned was not small. "Well," she said, setting her bag on the table, "the child is in better cardiovascular shape than half the middle-aged men in this county." Relief hit first, then anger because relief itself had become an accusation. "And the medication?" Ruth asked. Susan pulled out a folded paper towel with bottle names written on it in blue ink. Magnesium gummies, a low-dose beta blocker prescribed years earlier but not obviously indicated now. Melatonin, an over-the-counter anti-anxiety herbal mixture. A hydration powder, 2 vitamin blends. She tapped the beta blocker line. "This is the biggest problem. In a healthy or mostly healthy adolescent, this could absolutely contribute to fatigue, sluggishness, low exercise confidence, maybe dizziness if mismanaged. I can't say what dose he's actually swallowing from across a kitchen, but I can say I see no reason from the records we have for him to be living like an invalid while taking this as part of some household routine." My chair scraped hard against the floor when I stood. "Enough." Ruth pointed a finger at me. "Sit." I did not. I walked to the sink, braced both hands against it, and stared out the dark window over the back pasture where Ellen used to point out deer at dusk. "He has been drugging him," I said. Susan answered carefully. "No, Rachel has been giving him something with consequences she either ignored or welcomed. Let's stay precise. Precision is useful. It also sometimes feels like the enemy of justice." That night it kept me from marching straight upstairs, tearing every bottle out of Rachel's cabinets, and ending the whole thing with noise instead of proof. That same evening, while Susan and Ruth were still at my table, I called Daniel for the first time in almost 4 years. He answered on the third ring. "Ben." Just that. No surprise, no accusation, as if some part of him had always known this call would come eventually, only much later than it should have. "I need to see you," I said. Silence. Then about Noah. It was not a question. That shamed me all over again. "Yes." He did not make me ask twice. We met the next morning at a pull-off near the old state game lands where men in my town go when they want conversations without witnesses. Daniel looked older. Of course he did. So did I. But he looked older in the way men look after repeated powerlessness. Shoulders still strong, face more lined, something careful built into his posture. He kept his truck idling for a minute before shutting it off, like he was not convinced this meeting would hold. I stood by my tailgate and said the words I had been delaying for years. You were right that something was wrong. He closed his eyes once, not triumph, something closer to exhaustion finally being allowed to sit down. Then he said, "How bad?" I told him about the soccer field, about the school file, about the fake doctor name from Seattle, about the original note Ellen had saved, about the beta blocker, about the unplugged monitor. When I finished, Daniel did not speak for a long time. Then he asked, "Did Noah ask you not to tell her?" "Yes." His jaw tightened. "She's been using fear since he was little. Not screaming fear, quiet fear, the kind that feels like responsibility." That was exactly right, which made it worse. "Why didn't you go to court harder?" I asked, and the second it left my mouth, I hated myself for how close it sounded to blame. Daniel let it land anyway. "I did," he said. "You just only ever saw the part Rachel wanted repeated. I filed for second opinions. I asked for independent review. I got told I was minimizing. Then when Noah was 8, Rachel produced a stack of parent reports, symptom logs, one specialist letter I now think she made herself, and a statement that my pushing physical activity caused episodes." He gave a humorless laugh. "Try convincing a judge you're not the reckless dad when the mother comes in with binders and a child who looks pale because she keeps him pale." That sentence stayed with me because it was the exact shape of the whole crime. Not one giant lie, 1,000 little curated conditions. Daniel reached into his truck and brought out a flat manila envelope. "I brought something in case this day ever happened," he said. Inside were copies of motions, letters, missed access requests, screenshots of texts Rachel had sent him over the years. You don't get to crash in and destabilize him because you miss being a father. If you make him play and his numbers drop again, that blood is on you. The cardiologist agrees your denial is dangerous. He cried for an hour after your last visit and slept with chest pain. I read them standing there against the truck, every line built to do one thing, attach fatherhood to risk. Then there were photos. Daniel's apartment with a small twin bed made up under a poster of planets, a fishing rod, a kid-sized life vest, a birthday cake shaped like a soccer ball. Dates on the back, never used, never seen by Noah. "I kept getting ready for him," Daniel said, staring out toward the woods. "Every season, every change, like maybe if I stayed prepared, one crack would open." I could not answer that. There are apologies too late even before they are spoken. Finally he asked, "What do you need from me?" It would have been simpler to say everything, but everything was not yet practical. "For now," I said, "I need you steady, available. And I need whatever part of you still knows Noah when he's scared." Daniel nodded. "I still know him," he said. Then after a second, quieter, "I just don't know who he's had to become to survive her." That was the right question, and it haunted me the whole drive home. Noah did not tell me the truth all at once. That would have been cleaner, better for movies. One trembling confession in the barn, then the old man springs into action with full righteous clarity. Real children, especially children trained inside somebody else's fear, do not work like that. They leak truth, then panic, then pull it back, then test whether you are safe enough for the next drop. The first real crack came 3 days after I met Daniel. Rachel had taken Mason to look at donor seating options for the gala at the country club. That was her phrase, donor seating options, as if human beings at tables were a cardiovascular intervention. Noah had stayed home with a fatigue day. Susan came over at 2 with banana bread and the excuse already prepared. She had known Ellen for years. That much was true. She could ask nosy older lady questions without setting off alarms the way I now did. I stayed in the machine shed out back, pretending to sort extension cords through the open side door. From there I could see the kitchen windows and hear enough if voices rose. For almost 40 minutes, nothing much happened. Tea, small talk, banana bread, a chair moving, the sort of domestic harmlessness that lets predators relax because they think ordinary people will keep being ordinary. Then Susan's voice drifted out through the screen. "Your grandmother used to say you had a runner's ankles." A long silence. Then Noah, very quiet, "I'm not supposed to." "I know what you're supposed to say," Susan answered. "I'm asking what you know." Another long silence. So long I almost walked inside and ruined it. Then Noah asked, "Did Grandpa tell you?" No, his face told me enough. That made me smile in spite of everything, and the fact that I could still smile at all in that season felt obscene. There was more silence, a spoon in a cup, the hum of the refrigerator. Then Noah said, "My chest only hurts when I get scared." I stopped moving entirely. Susan did not react too strongly. She knew better. Scared of what? If I get caught? Doing what? There came the soft sound of a chair leg scraping and then a whisper too low to make out fully. I moved closer to the shed opening. Caught just enough. Being normal. Susan stayed another half hour. When she finally left, she came straight to the shed without looking back at the house. "Well," she said, "your grandson is not sick. He is conditioned." That word landed harder than I expected. Conditioned. Not fooled. Not merely lied to. Conditioned. Like a body or mind trained through repetition until it responds before thought gets a vote. "He says the chest pain only comes when he's afraid of getting caught," Susan went on. He says his mother checks his face before visitors come over and tells him when he looks too healthy. He says some pills are for his heart and some are for keeping the spikes down, and he does not know what spikes means except that he gets in trouble if he asks too many questions. I sat down on an overturned bucket because the ground had suddenly gone unreliable under me. Susan crouched in front of me like she was handling a child instead of a man almost 70 years old. I need you steady, Ben. Steady for what? For the next part. Because if we are right, this is no longer just fraud. It's psychological abuse, maybe medical abuse, and if Rachel senses even 1 degree more suspicion than usual, she will tighten control. I rubbed my hand over my mouth. How long? Long enough that he apologizes before he answers anything true. That sentence defined the whole next phase of my life. Long enough that he apologizes before he answers anything true. From then on, every conversation with Noah became a kind of excavation. I could not push too hard. Rachel watched Tone the way prison guards watch door hinges. If Noah came out of a room too quiet or too lit up, she noticed. If I lingered near him alone for more than 10 minutes, she drifted closer under some excuse. So the work had to happen in pieces. By the mailbox, in the barn, while shelling peas at the table, walking to the edge of the pasture where the service dropped and Rachel hated Noah to go because she said emergency contact could get compromised. What I learned came in fragments. He had not believed he was dying all the time. That would have been too simple. Rachel's story adapted as he got older. When he was little, it was your heart is delicate. When he turned 10, it became your heart is stable if you behave correctly. By 12, it had changed again. You are one mistake away from triggering something no one can fix in time. Stress counts, running counts, anger counts, secrets count. Your father made things worse because he always pushed. Grandpa would not survive knowing how close things really are. That last lie was one Rachel returned to constantly, not because it was medically convincing, because it tied Noah's freedom directly to my imagined death. Every boy who ever loved a grandfather becomes manageable under that kind of threat. Then there were the episodes. I asked Noah once, when we were sorting old nails in the barn because Rachel said it was quiet enough work, what actually happened on his bad days. He kept his eyes on the coffee can of bent nails while he answered. Sometimes nothing. Sometimes Mom says my color's off and I need to lie down. Sometimes she asks if I feel weird, and if I say no, she keeps asking until I get nervous, and then I do feel weird. Sometimes she gives me the slow pill if people are coming. The slow pill. I kept my face still with more effort than I knew I had. What does the slow pill do? Makes my arms heavy. Makes me not want to talk much. Do you know its name? He shook his head. It's the blue one. Sometimes half, sometimes full. A blue pill. A healthy 13-year-old boy taking a blue pill to look sick in front of donors and grandparents. I could feel the inside of my skull pounding. Does Mason ever give it to you? Noah's mouth tightened. Not fear exactly, a different kind of shame. Only if Mom's in the shower or gone. He says he knows the system. The system. By then, the word care had already rotted in my mind. But system somehow sounded worse, more honest, more mechanical. Like Noah's childhood had been turned into a set of levers. Another fragment came while we were stacking wood in late October. Mom says the fundraiser works better if I wear blue. Why? Because it makes me look more tired. I dropped the split oak onto the pile harder than I meant to. Noah flinched at the sound and immediately said sorry. That did me in more than the sentence before it. He apologized to me because my reaction had been loud, not because he had done anything wrong. That is what conditioning does. It shifts blame toward the smallest safe place until the child himself becomes the sponge for everybody else's discomfort. I said carefully, "Buddy, you do not have to apologize for her saying something ugly." He looked confused. Not resistant. Confused. Like the concept itself was still too foreign to place. Then there was the room. Not a locked room like in the kinds of horror stories people tell each other online. Worse, in a way. A normal bedroom turned into a stage set. One afternoon, Rachel sent me upstairs for a stack of tablecloths from the linen closet while she was outside on the phone with gala sponsors. Noah was at school. Mason had gone into town for vendor pricing, which usually meant sports betting and at least one chain restaurant appetizer he could not afford. I found the tablecloths, then saw the loose board. Ellen had always meant to fix that section of the closet floor and never got around to it. The left rear plank near the baseboard lifted slightly if you stepped on the wrong spot. I knew it. Rachel knew it too. Apparently, she also knew it could hide things. Underneath was a black metal file box, not locked, just hidden. I did not even think. I lifted it out, carried it to the guest room, and opened it on the bed. Inside were benefit ledgers, copies of sponsorship agreements, stacked cash envelopes with sticky notes, old doctor letterhead, a laminating pouch kit, a portable label maker, school accommodation drafts, a plastic organizer full of medication inserts with names highlighted, and a binder tabbed by year. Winter protocols. That binder is one of the reasons I still believe hell, if it exists, is probably very well organized. Inside were gala planning notes, symptom coaching points, meal adjustments before events, donor messaging language, wardrobe instructions, and what looked at first glance like caregiver reminders. Rest child before appearance. Reduce redness in cheeks with cool cloth. No sports 48 hours before event. Full blue pill if over-talkative. Seat by light source left side. If child color good, use pale blue, not red or green. Avoid father contact week of benefit if agitation rises. I read each page twice because my mind resisted the plainness of it. This was not panic, not overprotective motherhood, not the desperate improvisation of a scared single parent. It was management. Event-based health theater calibrated against donation psychology. Then I found the page that made me sit down. Talking points for child if asked. I get tired fast. I miss sports, but I know my heart matters more. Sometimes I worry about grandpa because he worries about me. Dad doesn't understand the seriousness the way mom does. There it was. My dead wife's absence. My own grief. Daniel's exile. Noah's body. All braided into a script clean enough to fit inside a binder. I heard Rachel's car door slam outside and shoved everything back exactly as I had found it, hands shaking so badly I nearly put the tabs in upside down. Then I slid the file box under the floorboard, carried the tablecloths downstairs, and set them on the dining table just as Rachel came in through the mudroom. "Find them?" she asked. "Yep." She gave me that quick assessing look she always used when entering a room, checking temperature, checking faces, checking whether the set had shifted. For one terrible second I thought she knew. Then she smiled. "I swear this house eats linens." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because the urge to tell her yes, and apparently it eats children too, passed through me like a lightning strike. That night, Ruth came over after dark. I showed her the photos I had taken on my phone of every page I dared photograph from the binder. The symptom coaching, the wardrobe notes, the highlighted inserts, the blue pill instruction. She sat very still through all of it. Then she said, "All right, now we stop thinking only like wounded relatives. We think like prosecutors." That was the first time the story became revenge instead of discovery. Not revenge in the childish sense. Not slashed tires. Not screaming on front lawns. Not poison in coffee. A cleaner kind. The kind where you let a person build one more beautiful stage for their lie, then remove the floor under it with facts so solid the whole room hears the sound. Ruth was the one who insisted we stop using words like maybe. Maybe Rachel exaggerated. Maybe Noah had recovered and no one updated the paperwork. Maybe Mason was just freeloading opportunistically. Maybe the benefit money had sloppy accounting without malicious intent. "No more maybes," she said, standing in my kitchen with the binder photos spread across the table. "Not after this." Susan agreed. "A scared mother does not create wardrobe instructions for donor psychology," she said. "And no legitimate health management system refers to a child as over-talkative before an event." So we built the case in layers. The first layer was medical clarity. Noah needed a real evaluation away from Rachel. Not someday. Now. Not because I doubted the records anymore. Because a healthy child who has spent years being told his heart is dangerous needs more than his grandfather's outrage to dismantle that lie. He needs a doctor to tell him clearly what is true. Getting him there without blowing everything up took more planning than I am proud to admit. Rachel's schedule revolved around the gala by then. Calls, sponsor lunches, linen choices, auction baskets, auctioneer confirmations, menu tasting. She moved through the house with a headset in one ear and a smile sharp enough to cut wrapping paper. Mason handled parking arrangements and alcohol pricing as if the Lord himself had assigned him event management as a path to redemption. The gala was in 12 days. That mattered. Short enough that they were distracted, long enough to build something fatal for them. We used Rachel's own habits against her. Twice a week, she drove into Harrisburg for vendor runs, and Mason usually went because he liked being treated like a man with authority over invoices. On the first Thursday after I found the binder, Ruth arranged for Susan to drop by unexpectedly with an old album of Ellen's college photos. That gave me a reason to ask Noah if he wanted to ride with me to the farm stand while they were out. Fresh cider. Pumpkins for the church display. 10 minutes, tops. Ordinary. Rachel hesitated. That alone told me she sensed some shift she could not yet name. Then Noah did something brave and tiny and enormous. He said, "Please," not loudly, not dramatically, just that one word. Rachel looked from him to me and back again, then said, 30 minutes, and keep your phone on, Noah." She had never made him carry a phone before, not really. Another small sign of pressure. I drove past the farm stand and straight to Susan's old clinic friend in Mechanicsburg. Dr. Karen Belsky was semi-retired, angry at insurance companies on principle, and the sort of physician who had seen enough parental distortion over 30 years to recognize when a child's self-report arrived heavily edited. Noah sat on the exam table in his hoodie and jeans, hands tucked between his knees, eyes darting around the room every time somebody opened a cabinet. Karen did not rush him, did not perform pity, did not say "brave boy" once. She listened to his chest, checked his pulse, took a full history, and asked questions Rachel had apparently not allowed anyone else to ask without supervision. What happens when you run? What happens when you get scared? What do the pills make you feel like? Who told you what your condition is? What have you been told your body cannot survive? What do you think will happen if you stop taking the blue pill? Noah answered in whispers at first, then in sentences. Then, when Karen asked whether anyone had ever told him he was safe, he started crying without sound, tears just spilling while he shook his head. I stood by the wall and looked away because some pains belong to the child first, even when your own guilt is choking you. The tests took less than an hour. EKG, basic vitals, exercise response check with modified supervision. Simple things. Not the giant dramatic machines Rachel liked describing in benefit speeches. When Karen came back in, she pulled her stool directly in front of Noah, not me. "I want you to hear this from my mouth," she said. He kept his eyes down. "Your heart is not acting like a dangerous heart. I see no reason, from what I'm seeing today and what I've reviewed already, for you to live as if normal movement will kill you." Noah looked up slowly, not hopeful yet. Hope takes too much risk for children like him. "What about the spikes?" he whispered. Karen frowned gently. "What spikes?" "The hidden kind, from stress." She held his gaze. "Stress can make anybody feel awful. Fast pulse, chest tightness, dizziness. But feeling scared is not the same as having a broken heart. Do you understand me?" He did not answer. So she said it again in even simpler language. "Your body has been taught to be afraid. That is real, but it is not the same thing as your heart being unsafe." That was the first time I saw Noah look like the ground under him had moved in a good direction and he did not yet trust it enough to step. Afterward, Karen met with me and Susan in the hall. "I want full records," she said. "And I want a pediatric psychologist looped in fast. This child has been living inside illness conditioning, possibly medication misuse, definitely coercive emotional framing. Whatever you're doing, do not tip the mother before you have him protected." Protected, not convinced, not corrected, protected. That word changed the center of my anger. Until then, I had still been thinking like a cheated man. Money, fraud, my house, my daughter's lies, the humiliations. Karen turned the axis. This was about a boy's mind and body after years of being used as narrative equipment. We got Noah back inside the 30 minutes because Susan drove like a woman trying to outrun regret itself. At the farm stand, I bought 3 pumpkins, 2 bags of apples, a jar of sorghum and cider we did not need just in case Rachel started checking receipts later. When we got home, Rachel was in the kitchen arranging centerpiece samples in little circles on the table. Mason was on the phone bragging about liquor pricing. "How was the farm stand?" Rachel asked without looking up. "Busy," I said. Noah set the pumpkin on the counter and went upstairs. Rachel looked at his face and narrowed her eyes. "Are you tired?" He hesitated. I could see the old answer fighting the new reality across his face. Then he gave a tiny shrug. "A little." That was enough for her. She returned to her centerpieces, but I did not miss the way Noah's hands shook when he reached for the stair rail. Truth can destabilize at first too, especially when it collides with years of obedience. That evening, he slipped a folded square of paper under my guest room door. 3 words. "Can I ask?" No period, no question mark, just the request itself. I found him 15 minutes later in the laundry room because Rachel almost never went in there unless a pipe leaked or a hamper overflowed. He stood with one shoulder against the dryer, arms folded tightly across himself. "You can ask anything," I said. He did not look at me right away. "If I'm not sick," he whispered, "then why did I feel sick so much?" I leaned back against the opposite wall and chose my words like glass. Because fear can make your body feel real things. And because some of what she gave you may have made it worse. And because if people keep telling a kid his body is dangerous, eventually his body starts listening, he swallowed. So I'm not crazy. That nearly broke me. "No," I said, "you're not crazy. You were handled." He nodded slowly, as if handled made more sense than any other word he had heard in years. Then he asked the question I had been dreading. "Did you know? There is no adult answer to that which does not cost something. I could have protected myself, said not exactly, said I had doubts, said she lied to all of us. All partly true. Instead, I told him the truth that mattered. Not enough and not soon enough. I should have fought harder. I am sorry." He kept staring at the floor. Then he said, so softly I almost missed it, "Mom said you liked it because helping me made Grandma's death mean something." I shut my eyes. There it was. One more way Rachel had braided Ellen's death into the structure. Not just grief as weakness, grief as purpose. As if my wife's dying had become a fundraising strategy. "That is not true," I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears. "Nothing about Grandma's death made this right." He nodded, then leaned sideways until his shoulder touched the dryer behind him and slid down into a crouch. "I don't know how to stop acting sick," he said. I crouched too, knees complaining. "We'll learn." That was when he finally looked at me. We, such a small word, such a devastating one when a child has been carrying adulthood alone. The next piece came from money again. Dennis Greer, a forensic accountant Ruth knew from an elder fraud case, met us in his office above a title company in Carlisle. He wore loud patterned socks and treated spreadsheets the way priests treat relics, not reverently. with professional fascination and zero patience for lies told by numbers. I brought every transfer I could find: bank records, check copies, benefit programs, sponsor lists, vendor receipts, house improvement invoices, vehicle purchase dates, screenshots from the fundraising platform Rachel had used, pictures of the binder pages. Dennis spent 4 hours building an ugly little empire of arrows on a whiteboard. Every December transfer from me, every spring fundraising wave, every significant household upgrade, every large Mason-related expenditure, every medical emergency request timed conveniently near bill cycles or lifestyle expansions. Then he found something I had missed completely. The gala money did not just disappear into Rachel's checking account. It went first through an LLC, Mercer Family Advocacy Services LLC. I stared at the name, my own surname, attached to fraud, to an entity I had never heard of. Dennis pulled the filing. Rachel had registered it 18 months earlier. Business purpose vague, administrative services, family support coordination, no medical licensing, obviously, but enough vague language to catch money, reclassify it, and make a sponsor feel respectable for writing a check. Mason was listed nowhere officially, which meant he was involved everywhere unofficially. That's money laundering with a church smile, Dennis said. Ruth actually laughed at that. Short and vicious. We found more. The silver SUV Rachel claimed a donor had helped with was leased through the LLC. The gala alcohol deposits went through the same account. A contractor who installed the heated bathroom floors had been paid from it. Mason's side-by-side down payment connected through a cash withdrawal 2 days after that year's benefit. Even the black tie rental for the auctioneer had been reimbursed from restricted family support. Restricted. God help me. By the time Dennis was done, the money trail did not just show greed. It showed structure, planning, deliberate conversion of charitable and family funds into lifestyle support wrapped in illness language. Could she explain any of this innocently? I asked. Dennis made a face. Innocence doesn't usually survive a label maker and an LLC. That was the afternoon revenge stopped being a fantasy and became architecture. We had the medical truth. We had the child truth. We had the money truth. Now we needed Rachel's own mouth, and for that, we needed her comfortable, confident, still believing she was the smartest person in every room, which meant we had to let her think the gala was going exactly the way she planned. So I smiled more, asked fewer questions, carried chairs into the barn for storage, let Mason brag about valet flow, pretended to gripe only about old man things that would not alarm anybody, like parking distances and banquet coffee. Rachel relaxed visibly, not fully, but enough. She started leaving folders on the counter again, started speaking about our donor table, started reminding me what she planned to say from the stage when she announced my special gift. That phrase, special gift, followed her around like perfume. She had already spent it in her mind. I could see that. She expected 45,000, maybe more. And not just money. She expected a public blessing. One more year of community certainty that she was brave, burdened, and true. I decided then that if I had to destroy her, I would do it exactly there, on the stage she had built from my wife's absence and my grandson's fear. The days before the gala were the hardest because they required performance from all of us. Rachel's performance was old habit. Mason's was swagger. Mine was something I had never been good at. Warm normalcy under pressure. Noah's was the worst of all. He had to begin loosening from the role while still looking enough like the role that Rachel would not slam the whole system shut. That sounds simple when you say it fast. It was not. The first setback came 4 days after the clinic visit. Rachel stood in the upstairs hall outside Noah's room while I was in the bathroom shaving. Through the partly open door, I heard her say, "Why are your cheeks flushed?" Noah answered too slowly. I could hear the silence itself. Then Rachel again, sharper. "Did you run today?" "No. Mason said you were breathing hard when you came in." My hand froze with the razor half raised. Noah said, "I took the stairs too fast." Another pause. Then Rachel's voice softened in that way that always meant danger. "Baby, I need you to understand something. We are too close to winter for mistakes. Too close. Do you hear me?" He said yes. Then she said the line that made me set the razor down because my hand had started shaking. "If your grandfather gets upset now, he could lose more than money. People under grief pressure break." Grief pressure. As if Ellen's death were a medical lever she could still pull 5 years later. I came out of the bathroom drying my face and Rachel smiled at me so sweetly I almost admired the engineering. "Dad, do you mind if Noah skips church volunteer setup tonight? He's a little overdone." "Of course," I said. There is no taste quite like agreeing with your own enemy for tactical reasons. Metallic, humiliating, necessary. Later that night, Noah knocked on my guest room door after Rachel had gone downstairs to finalize seating charts. "She knows something's different," he whispered. "Does she know what?" He shook his head. "She just keeps looking at me. Can you hold a little longer?" He nodded, then didn't move. I waited. Finally he said, "If she gives me the blue pill before the gala, I don't know if I can say anything right." That had not occurred to me fully. The slow pill. Of course she would want him muted and fragile on stage. I called Susan immediately after he slipped back upstairs. She came over at 9:30 with a tackle box-sized plastic organizer and enough practical fury to light the whole county. "No more unsupervised dosing," she said. "How?" "We control the environment." That is how we ended up with the old thermos trick. For the next 4 days, every time Rachel announced one of Noah's regulation packets, I intercepted with some practical grandfatherly habit. "I'll make his tea. I'm already in the kitchen. Let me handle the water bottle. Let me carry the snack tray upstairs." Rachel resisted at first, then recalibrated. She could not reject ordinary help too hard without looking odd, especially because the house was full of gala prep and my increased usefulness fit the role she liked for me. Supportive grandfather, wallet with legs, harmless. Susan had shown Noah how to palm and dump the blue pill if absolutely necessary. A folded tissue in the sleeve cuff, a quick rinse in the sink, a flush if he could get privacy. The first time he managed it, he looked at me afterward with a mix of pride and terror that no 13-year-old should have to wear. "Good," I whispered. "I hate this," he whispered back. "I know. No, I mean the good hiding part." That sentence followed me all day, because he was right. We were teaching him another layer of concealment to survive the first one. Necessary concealment, maybe, but still concealment. There is no clean path out of a dirty structure. You just try to choose the stain that saves the child. The second setback came from Mason. He cornered me in the barn 2 nights before the gala while I was pretending to look for extension cords. He leaned against the workbench in his quarter-zip pullover, smelling like bourbon gum and false confidence. "You seem tense, Ben. Do I?" "Yeah." He smiled without warmth. "Big week. Money makes people weird." I kept sorting cords. "You always this philosophical before a fundraiser." He chuckled, then lowered his voice. "Rachel's carrying a lot. Sometimes I think you don't appreciate how much she's held this whole family together." There it was, the pre-accusation, the test. I turned and looked at him directly. For once, I let some age into my face on purpose. Tired eyes, slow blink, the look of an old man not interested enough to be dangerous. "I appreciate what keeps Noah alive," I said. Mason nodded slowly, studying me. Then he said, "Good, because if people start second-guessing now, that kind of stress lands on kids first." He wanted me to hear a threat as concern. Rachel had taught him well. I took one step closer. Not enough to challenge, enough to let him smell the electricity under the floorboards. "You know," I said, "I spent 40 years in construction sites where men who didn't know what they were doing loved using the word safety when they meant control. It became a bad habit of mine to notice the difference." He kept smiling, but something in his eyes shifted. A tiny tightening, a warning returning to sender. Then he shrugged, just trying to keep everybody rowing the same direction. He left me in the barn with the smell of bourbon gum and bullshit hanging in the air. That night I told Ruth and Daniel both the same thing. "He suspects something." Daniel answered first. "Can he prove it?" "No." "Then we do not blink first," Ruth answered second, more bluntly. "Good, let him sweat a little." Confident parasites get sloppy when the host changes rhythm. Again, with the accuracy. The final piece we needed was Rachel herself, not her paperwork, not Mason's pressure. Rachel. The gala reveal would be stronger if she went into it feeling safe enough to confess to small truths in private, not crimes with legal labels. People like Rachel almost never say fraud or abuse out loud, but contempt, exasperation, the real logic under the performance, that comes out if they think they are correcting someone weaker than themselves. So Ruth designed what she called the pre-stage conversation. I called it bait. The bait was the gift. Rachel believed I was preparing a $45,000 transfer to announce at the gala. We let her believe it, then expanded it. I asked her, casually over coffee one morning, whether it would make more sense to just formalize something larger now that Noah was getting older. Maybe a dedicated support fund. Maybe help with future housing or mobility renovations if things worsened. Maybe enough to take pressure off yearly scrambling. You have never seen a shark smell blood the way my daughter's face changed in that moment. Not greed exactly. Greed is too crude a word. Opportunity translated into moral permission. She lowered her mug very carefully. "What do you mean larger?" I shrugged. "I've been thinking, I'm not getting younger. The house is paid off. I still have the investment account. If Noah's going to need lifetime support, maybe I should stop doing this piecemeal and make it real." That last phrase I chose on purpose. Make it real. I wanted to see whether she flinched. She did not. She leaned in. "Dad, that would change everything." I looked down into my coffee. Let a little vulnerable old man uncertainty enter my voice. "I just don't want him exposed if something happens to me." That was the key. Something happens to me. Rachel had spent years using my imagined fragility to control Noah. Now I handed that same lever back to her in a form she could monetize. She reached across the table and squeezed my wrist, exactly like she used to do when she wanted me softened. "You're such a good man," she said. "You think ahead in ways nobody else does." Nobody else. Meaning Daniel. Meaning reality. Meaning anyone not paying. I asked, would Mason know who to talk to about setting something up? Her eyes flicked once toward the doorway. She was already calculating. Tax insulation, control, maybe the LLC. No, she said quickly. For Noah, it should stay close, family managed, clean, clean. Another one of her favorite words for hidden. I nodded. Then I gave the line Ruth had prepared. I'd feel better if we talked through it privately first. No emotion, no big scene, just you and me. Tomorrow, maybe. She smiled, warm, victorious, deadly. Of course. The next afternoon, Ruth wired the den with 2 tiny audio units. One tucked under the side table behind a stack of gala programs, one under the couch lip. Nothing fancy, nothing movie-like, just enough. Daniel sat in my truck out by the road where he could not be seen. Ruth listened from Susan's car parked beyond the windbreak. Noah was at school for one last half day before gala weekend prep. Mason was supposedly pricing floral stands in town, though Dennis later told me he had probably been at the off-track betting place outside Mechanicsburg. Rachel came into the den wearing a cream sweater and soft makeup. Not stage Rachel, family Rachel, the version built for inheritance conversations and sympathetic clergy. I had already placed a yellow legal pad on the coffee table with fake numbers scribbled across it. House value, investment liquidation, projected support reserve, all vague enough to feel real. She sat, smoothed her sweater, looked at the numbers, then looked at me. What were you thinking? I let myself hesitate. Not too long, just enough. Maybe 200,000 in some kind of account. Even now, part of me remembers the exact brightness that came into her eyes and wants to physically recoil from it. That would secure him. Secure him. She meant the structure, not the child. I'd want it used correctly, I said, of course, and I don't want Daniel near it. She relaxed another degree. That was deliberate too. I needed her to think the old loyalties still held. Dad, she said softly, Daniel has never understood what it takes. He loves Noah in his way, but love without discipline is just ego. That line, love without discipline is just ego. I can still hear her saying it with total sincerity. I flipped the legal pad page, pretended to study a number, then asked the first question. If we did this, what would it actually cover? She did not hesitate. Care coordination, medication, travel if new consults open up, flexibility if home modifications become necessary, private education if the school becomes too stressful, maybe a small protected housing option later if independent living isn't realistic. There it was. Protected housing, independent living not realistic. Noah 13 years old and already being narrated toward permanent dependency. I asked the second question. You really think he'll never be normal? Rachel's expression changed, not sad, annoyed, like I had used a childish word in a serious meeting. Dad, normal is a fantasy people cling to when they can't accept complexity. A beautiful sentence, elegant, empty, self-serving. Exactly the sort of thing people applaud at fundraisers. I let my shoulders slump. I just keep thinking about Ellen. She'd want him to have a chance. Rachel's face softened at my wife's name, not from grief, from utility. He does have a chance, she said, because I've done what nobody else was willing to do. There was a sharpness under it now, the real Rachel surfacing because she thought I was close to surrender. So Daniel really would have hurt him, I asked. She leaned back and crossed one leg over the other. Daniel would have ruined the structure. He kept pushing for sports, overnight trips, normalcy. He never understood that some children need limits to survive. Need limits. I asked it plain. Does Noah really need as much as we've been saying? She looked at me for a long moment, measuring, then deciding I was weak enough for partial truth. He needs what the situation requires. Not yes, not no. I kept my voice gentle. That's not what I asked. And then she said the sentence that later made Dana from the prosecutor's office smile for the first time in 6 hours of evidence review. Dad, if I had told people years ago that he was mostly fine, nobody would have stayed in line long enough for me to keep control of what mattered. There it was. Not the whole crime, but the logic. Control of what mattered. I kept breathing through the sound of my own blood in my ears. What mattered? Consistency, she said immediately. Funding, school deference, keeping Daniel out, keeping Noah from turning into one more impulsive male who confuses freedom with safety. I looked down at the numbers again, then asked carefully, and the benefits. This time she almost smiled. The benefits keep the wider support network emotionally invested. People give more when they feel like they're protecting innocence. I actually had to grip the pen to keep my hands steady. Protecting innocence. My grandson was not a boy to her in that sentence. He was an emotional asset class. I asked one more. And if Noah gets stronger? She shrugged. Actually shrugged. Then we managed the optics differently. That was enough. More than enough. I ended the conversation by saying I would have my banker prepare something and announce the commitment at the gala because it would inspire bigger giving. Rachel stood, kissed my forehead, and said, Mom would be proud you're finally thinking strategically. That line bought her destruction. Because the second she left the room, I walked to the side table, took the recorder out, and sat down very carefully so I would not fall. My wife would be proud. No, my wife would have seen through you before the court's countertops, before the LLC, before the fake monitor, before you taught a boy to fear his own pulse. Ruth met me in the driveway 5 minutes later. She had the live feed backup. Daniel had heard enough from the truck that he was shaking with a rage so controlled it made mine look theatrical. "You got her," Ruth said, not triumphantly, clinically, like a surgeon calling a margin clear. I looked at the little recorder in my hand and said, "No. She got herself. I just finally held the door open." Rachel did not wait for the gala to start spending the imaginary money. Within 24 hours of our recorded conversation, she had emailed me draft language from a family advisor about creating a managed support trust. The advisor turned out to be a generic template site and a local notary who mostly handled car title transfers. Mason printed the packet on thick cream paper as if texture itself could create legitimacy. Buried in the draft was the part Ruth had predicted. Primary administrative authority, Rachel Cole. Secondary administrative authority in the event of caregiver incapacity, Mason Pike. Disbursement discretion based on beneficiary compliance, medical need, and household stability. Beneficiary compliance. Noah was 13 years old and already being legally translated into a controllable expense category. Ruth redlined the whole packet in green pen while eating soup in my kitchen. Then she circled beneficiary compliance 3 times and wrote in the margin, "Not a trust, a leash." We took the recording to the county that afternoon. Detective Laura Mendez handled elder exploitation and fraud with the kind of expression that suggested she had long ago lost patience for people who confused nice homes with decent souls. Early 40s, dark hair pulled back, steady eyes, no wasted words. She listened to the den recording once all the way through, then again to specific sections. Then she put the headphones down and said, "I want full copies of everything, and I want that child nowhere near these people once we move." That was the first real official sentence in the whole story that sounded like rescue instead of theory. Mendez brought in 2 others by evening, an assistant DA named Colin Reeves and a child services supervisor named Arlene Tate. Reeves looked like a man who had been born suspicious and then paid to refine it. Arlene had the opposite energy, warm eyes, steel spine, the kind of woman children start telling the truth to before they understand why. They walked through the evidence methodically. Original cardiology note, current absence of severe restrictions, school file, nurse observations, Susan's medical concerns, the unplugged monitor photos, the winter protocol binder photos, the LLC trail, benefit accounting, my transfers, the recorded conversation, the medication list, Daniel's custody records. Everything. Arlene stopped longest at the page that read full blue pill, if over-talkative. She placed one finger on the line and asked, "How often has the child appeared subdued at public events?" "Every benefit," I said. "Every donor dinner. Every major church appearance. Most of the time she wanted him to sit quietly and look grateful." She nodded once, and something hard settled across her face. "That matters," Mendez said what all of us were thinking. "They've built a dependency structure around a false illness narrative and funded it through private and public money. The record is good, but if we remove the child before the gala, the suspects may lock down electronically and financially before we can map the whole thing." Arlene asked the question I feared most. Can Noah hold 2 more days? Nobody answered immediately. Not because we did not care, because everybody in the room understood what 2 more days meant to a boy who had already carried 7 years. Then Reeves said, "If he can safely participate in one controlled event and it gives us live corroboration, we move stronger and faster." Controlled event. That phrase bothered me at first because it sounded too much like Rachel's vocabulary. Mendez must have seen it on my face because she added, "Controlled by us, Mr. Mercer, for his protection." I nodded. Then she outlined the plan. We would let the gala happen. Not because Rachel deserved one more performance, because she had organized the stage herself and would step onto it expecting complete control. The official team would be present, some as guests, some as staff, some nearby, audio-ready body camera on a donor volunteer if needed, Arlene with emergency removal authority for Noah. Uniforms close enough to arrive fast, far enough not to spook them early. My role was simple. Attend, smile, act old. Let Rachel believe the big gift still existed. Do not improvise. Do not improvise. That last instruction got repeated 3 times by 3 different people, which should tell you what kind of face I was apparently making during the meeting. Daniel's role was harder. He was to remain off-site until the reveal point unless Noah specifically asked for him sooner. Arlene worried that Rachel seeing Daniel in the room too early would jolt the whole structure into panic. She was right. Daniel hated that she was right. Noah's role was the most delicate. Arlene and Susan met with him together the next morning at a county counseling office, disguised as a private educational planning consult, in case Rachel somehow traced the appointment. I sat outside for the first half hour because Arlene said children sometimes need one room where no love is trying to apologize at them. When she finally let me in, Noah was sitting on a soft gray couch with a juice box in his hands like a much younger child. He looked exhausted, not because of illness, because truth has an appetite. Arlene spoke directly and gently. "We think your mother and Mr. Pike have been hurting you with lies. We think they have also used money and fear to control what happens around you. Tonight and tomorrow, adults will be watching to make sure you are safe. You do not have to perform illness. You do not have to defend anyone. You do not have to protect your grandfather from the truth." Noah listened without moving. Then he asked, "What if she says I ruined everything?" Arlene answered instantly, "Then she is wrong." He looked at Susan, then at me, then at the carpet. "What if she cries?" That question almost undid me. Arlene did not let it become a sentimental moment. Thank God for that. "Then she cries," she said. "Your job is not to fix adult tears." Again, something children should hear much sooner than most of them do. Susan explained the medication strategy. No unsupervised pills, no blue pill. Water only from sealed bottles we controlled once he got to the venue. If Rachel tried to dose him in the prep room, he was to say he felt nauseous and ask for the bathroom where Arlene or a plainclothes officer would be nearby. Noah nodded. Then he asked one more question. "If I tell the truth there, does Grandpa lose the house?" That took the room's breath away for a second because it showed how deeply Rachel's scripts had linked his honesty to my destruction. I walked over then and sat on the far edge of the couch so he could choose the distance. "No," I said. "I keep the house, keep the truth, that's how it works now." He nodded slowly. Then after a long silence he said, "Can Dad come after?" Arlene looked at me, I looked at her. Then she said, "Yes, after." That single word changed his whole posture. Not dramatically, just enough. His shoulders dropped 1 inch. His grip on the juice box loosened. After. A real after. Not Rachel's forever later never. That evening, as if the universe were trying to test whether I still believed in cruel timing, the church ladies arrived with 12 homemade centerpieces for the gala and spent 20 minutes praising Rachel in my kitchen. "She's so strong. She never complains. That poor dear just lives for that child." The way she turned suffering into service. Rachel stood there receiving all of it in a burgundy blouse and pearl earrings, one hand resting lightly on Noah's shoulder. The sainted mother. The brave organizer. The woman who smiled while carrying impossible burdens. I looked at her and thought, tomorrow night you are going to say one wrong thing into a microphone and the whole county will finally hear your real voice. That thought should have felt triumphant. Mostly it felt tired. Because revenge fantasies are clean. Real revenge is built from paperwork, waiting, and keeping a child alive long enough to expose the adults who turned him into a prop. The night before the gala, Noah came to my guest room after everyone had gone upstairs. He stood in the doorway holding the folded navy jacket Rachel had picked out for him. The one from the binder notes. Navy photographs, serious without overdoing pallor. She had written that line herself. "I hate this jacket," he said. "I know." He looked down at it, then up at me. "If I wear it tomorrow, am I helping her?" A question like that can split a man right through the center. I thought about lying, saying, "No, buddy, clothes don't matter," but the whole point now was truth without melodrama. "You'll be helping us end it," I said. He nodded, then asked, "Will people be mad at me?" That question hurt more than all the money did, because children raised inside adult fraud usually assume exposure will brand them too, like they carry contamination from the lie. "Some people might be shocked," I said. "A few might be embarrassed they didn't see, but the ones who matter will be angry at the adults, not at you." He held the jacket against his chest and said, "What if I get scared and freeze?" "Then you freeze. Adults around you know what to do." He looked toward the hall, listening for Rachel's steps. Then he asked, "Did Grandma know?" I felt my throat close up. She knew something was wrong. I said, "She wanted me to ask harder questions. I didn't soon enough." He nodded, not blaming, just storing the fact with all the other difficult adult truths he had already had to learn too young. Then he said in a voice so quiet it almost disappeared, "I wish she was here." I opened my arms without thinking. He stood still for 1 second, then stepped in. He was almost as tall as Rachel now, all elbows and hidden strength, and held breath. When I wrapped my arms around him, I could feel how tense his back stayed at first, as if hugs might also have rules attached. Then slowly, carefully, he leaned into it. "Me too," I said into his hair. "More than I can tell you." After he left, I sat awake until almost 2 a.m. listening to the house. Rachel walking from room to room upstairs, cabinet doors, Mason's heavier steps, the ice maker, the old baseboard clicking, a truck on the road out front, the same house Ellen had made feel kind, now full of strategy. Tomorrow it would hold one more evening of performance. Then, if justice did its job, it would never belong to Rachel's version of the world again. The Noah's Heart Winter Benefit took over the Carlisle Country Club every year, as if old money and private suffering had always belonged in the same room. By 6 o'clock on gala night, the parking lot glittered with dark SUVs, polished sedans, 2 local dealership loaners with discreet bow decals on the mirrors, and the kind of pickup trucks men still wash before charity events, so everybody knows generosity can also tow horse trailers. Inside, the ballroom looked exactly the way Rachel liked her lies. Warm, softly lit, tasteful, expensive enough to flatter the donors, restrained enough to suggest humility. Blue and silver centerpieces, cream linens, candles in hurricane glass. A A silent auction wall with spa baskets, football tickets, handcrafted quilts, a mountain cabin weekend, a golf package, and something called a wellness retreat that sounded suspiciously like two women from church had reinvented napping as philanthropy. At the far end stood the stage, low black riser, podium with the event logo, string lights draped behind navy curtains, a large framed photo of Noah on an easel near the sponsor board. Rachel always liked at least one oversized image of him near the entrance. Not too smiling, not too sad, just vulnerable enough to guide the room's emotional weather before anybody touched a bread plate. I arrived at 6:15 wearing the charcoal suit Ellen bought me for our 25th anniversary dinner and altered twice since then because men get softer in the middle and then harder again when grief takes over. Ruth walked in beside me as my guest in a dark blue dress and earrings that looked expensive and judgmental. She had the prosecutor's office notes in a slim purse and the expression of a woman attending both a gala and an autopsy. "Remember," she murmured near the coat check, "old, harmless, generous, do not invent anything." I looked at her. "You've said that so many times I'm starting to feel insulted." "That's because you should." Fair enough. Mendez was already inside posing as a donor contact from a regional sponsor. You would never have picked her out unless you knew her eyes. Arlene stood near the back with a woman from Child Services who looked like somebody's aunt from York. Two uniformed officers waited off-site. Two more plainclothes officers were in staff black among the event crew. Reeves, the assistant DA, sat at a middle table pretending to be the husband of a local pediatric dentist. Aaron Bell from Tech had the live audio feed routed through a service corridor setup that used the event AV closet and a lot of calm lying. Daniel waited 2 streets over in a church parking lot with instructions not to move until Arlene called. I hated that part. He hated it more. But everybody agreed his face appearing too early would blow the room open before Rachel's own mouth did the work for us. And then there was Noah. Rachel had him positioned exactly as the binder prescribed, near the stage but not on it, at a round table angled toward the donor lanes, navy jacket, pale blue shirt, no tie because she said ties made him look too hardy, hair combed neatly, color carefully reduced by keeping him inside all afternoon. No blue pill, thank God, because Susan and Arlene had intercepted his prep room access twice under the pretense of venue logistics and last-minute symptom review protocol. He looked tired anyway. Anyone would have. When he saw me, his fingers tightened on his water glass. I gave him one small nod. Not reassurance exactly. A signal. Still here. Still moving. Still after. Rachel floated toward me 3 minutes later with the event smile fully installed. You have probably seen that smile somewhere. Maybe on TV. Maybe in church. Maybe in hospital hallways. The smile of a person who wants to look brave enough to inspire and burdened enough to be untouchable. "Dad," she said, kissing the air near my cheek. "You look handsome." "So do you," I said. She did. I can admit that now without flinching. Cream silk gown, hair pinned up, simple necklace. Nothing too flashy. Rachel always understood the kind of beauty that reads sacrificial in rooms full of money. "Is everything all set for your announcement?" she asked softly. There it was immediately. No hello about how I was feeling. No comment about the room. Straight to the thing she had already spent inside her own head. I let a little uncertainty enter my face. Again, old and generous. "I've got the envelope." Her eyes flicked toward my inside pocket. Not greed, inventory. "Wonderful," she whispered. "This is going to give the room so much hope." Hope. One more thing she had learned to bill for. Mason joined us with 2 bourbons in hand and the swagger of a man who thought access to other people's money had upgraded his bones. "Big night, Ben," he said, clapping my shoulder a little too hard. "Seems that way," he grinned. "You ready to make history?" I looked around the ballroom, the candles, the flowers, the sponsor logos, the giant photograph of my grandson staged as living evidence of his own fraud. "Yes," I said, "I think I am." Dinner began at 7. Chicken for most tables, salmon option at the sponsor level, rolls too shiny from butter, potatoes trying hard to sound artisanal, the country club's usual belief that charity should taste like reduced sauce and moderate guilt. I barely touched mine. Rachel did not eat at all. She never ate much during the public phase of her performances. Eating reads too comfortable. She moved from table to table with a hand on shoulders, a pause at elbows, a soft thanks here, a sponsor whisper there. Mason handled the auction sheets in the bar. Noah sat where he was told and answered every, "How are you feeling tonight, sweetheart?" with a small, careful sentence that would have impressed diplomats. I watched all of it and thought of the binder page that had mapped his body into optics. At 7:40, the MC took the stage. Local radio man, big voice, too much laugh for the material. He had hosted the last 3 benefits and always seemed a little overexcited by suffering as long as it came with table assignments. He thanked the sponsors, praised resilience, called Rachel a force of maternal grace. I saw Ruth nearly choke on still water at that. Then came the first short video, photos of Noah over the years, hospital bracelet, blanket on couch, window light, school books, close-up of his hand in mine from some Christmas event I barely remembered. The music underneath was piano, of course. Always piano. No one ever scams small-town generosity with jazz. When the screen went dark, people applauded. Some wiped tears. One woman at the next table squeezed my forearm and whispered, "You must be so proud." Proud. That word hit differently than the others, because in its clean form I should have been proud. Proud of Noah for surviving. Proud of Ellen's memory in him. Proud of Rachel if she had been who she pretended. Instead, I nodded and said, "Tonight's an important night," which was true in more ways than she could have guessed. By 8:10, the silent auction closed. Mason strutted across the stage to thank every single person who refused to let this family fight alone. That line would have been funnier if it hadn't cost nearly $200,000 in a child's mind. Then Rachel took the podium. I had watched my daughter speak in public before, school ceremonies, church fundraisers, one town council comment period years ago where she managed to sound both reasonable and morally superior about parking lot runoff. But this was her natural habitat. Warm lights, held breath, controlled room. She began low, thanked the club, thanked local businesses, thanked the angels who show up year after year when medicine and reality don't care how hard a family prays. A little too much, maybe, but the room loved it. Of course it did. People forgive bad writing when the speaker knows where to break her voice. Then she moved into the story. Noah's difficult year, Noah's courage, the unpredictability of pediatric cardiac burden, the loneliness of caregiving, the importance of sustained support, the quiet heroism of not knowing what tomorrow holds but setting the table anyway. I could almost hear Ellen beside me mutter, "Too polished by half." Rachel invited Noah to stand near the stage. He did. Not with the slow, careful steps she usually coached into him. Not exactly, but enough to keep her calm. She rested a hand lightly on his shoulder and said, "This child has taught me that the most fragile hearts can also be the bravest." There was that word again. Fragile. Then she looked toward my table. And there is one man in this room who has never once asked what this cost him before asking what Noah needed. The spotlight turned. A deliberate soft circle catching my suit and silver hair and old man's shoulders at exactly the right angle. I stood because if I had not, she would have insisted. People clapped. Some rose halfway. The MC beamed. Mason lifted his glass like a man toasting his own reflection. Rachel smiled down at me. "My father," she said, "lost my mother and still chose over and over to turn that grief into action. Dad, before tonight's appeal begins, would you come up here and say a few words?" There it was, the invitation, the stage, the floor she had built with 7 years of certainty. I felt Ruth's eyes on me from the table, Mendez from the back, Arlene near the side door, Noah on stage in that awful jacket, Rachel glowing in borrowed sainthood. I reached into my inside pocket and touched the envelope. Then I walked to the stage. Every step sounded too loud to me. Old carpet over wood, soft bounce, applause fading. The MC stepping aside. Rachel hugged me once at the podium. One arm. Public affection. Private possession. "You don't have to say much," she whispered. "Just enough." I looked at her. Really looked at her. My daughter. My only child. My wife's eyes in a face that had learned how to weaponize tears better than language. Then I stepped to the microphone. For 1 second, the room was exactly the room Rachel thought it was. A tired old grandfather about to say something noble and fund the next chapter of a lie. I unfolded the envelope. Inside was not a check. It was Ellen's original cardiology note, the one with her pencil mark in the margin. I held it up. "My wife," I said, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Underlined this sentence 6 years ago." The room quieted in the wrong direction, not moved, alert. Rachel's smile shifted almost invisibly. I read the line into the microphone. "No evidence at present of structural heart disease requiring long-term activity restriction." Silence. Not total. You still hear water glasses, silverware, somebody coughing in a ballroom. But the moral silence arrived. The one where people realize the speech in front of them has changed genre. Rachel gave a soft laugh beside me, a warning laugh. "Oh, Dad, that was the early..." I raised one hand without looking at her. Not dramatic, just enough. "For 6 years," I continued, "I was told my grandson's heart was so fragile that running could kill him." Now the room was still. 3 weeks ago," I said, "I watched him sprint the length of a soccer field and score a goal." Rachel's hand left my back. I felt it happen more than saw it. Somebody near the front gasped. The MC looked at the AV booth as if maybe this was part of the program and he had not been warned. Noah did not move. Not yet. Rachel stepped toward the microphone. "Dad, maybe this isn't the right..." "No," I said into the mic. "It's the first right time this family has had in years." That line landed. I could feel it. Mason started forward from the floor. One of the plainclothes officers shifted before he got halfway there. Mason stopped, confused rather than alarmed. Good. Let him stay confused. I reached into the folder hidden behind the podium and brought out the next pages. Real medical records, school file copies, the Seattle doctor fake, the winter protocol prints. Not all at once. Enough. "I believed my daughter," I said. "I believed because I was grieving, because I loved that boy, because fear makes paper look holy if the child in the photograph is your blood." I looked out across the tables. "Some of you believe too. Some of you gave money you worked hard for because you were told a child's heart needed protecting. Rachel hissed, "Stop." The microphone picked it up. Perfectly. A little extra gift from the room's acoustics. I turned toward her then, just enough for the whole ballroom to see her face. "No," I said quietly, but into the mic. "You stop." Then I held up the enlarged sponsor summary Dennis had prepared. "This benefit money did not go where you were told it went. Neither did my annual transfers. They went through a company my daughter formed under my family name. They paid for vehicles, renovations, event expenses, and a life that had more use for pity than truth." Mason tried again. "Ben, this is not—" Mendez rose from the back then. "No badge yet, just movement. Enough." "Sir," she said, calm and clear, "stay where you are." The room turned toward her, then back to me, then to Rachel, then to Noah. Rachel's face had gone almost white beneath the makeup, but she still tried to recover. "Dad is confused," she said into the side of the microphone, which made the sentence carry farther than she intended. "He's been under a lot of stress, and he found older paperwork and—" That was when I nodded to Aaron in the AV booth. The screen behind us lit up, not with benefit photos, with the Den recording transcript header, then audio. Rachel's own voice filled the room. If I had told people years ago that he was mostly fine, nobody would have stayed in line long enough for me to keep control of what mattered. The whole ballroom inhaled. Then again, her voice. The benefits keep the wider support network emotionally invested. People give more when they feel like they're protecting innocence. You know that feeling when a room's temperature changes without the thermostat moving. That happened. Rachel lunged toward the AV table control panel on the podium stand. The plainclothes officer nearest the stage moved first. Not violently, just decisively. Hand to forearm. Enough to stop the reach. Mason shouted, "Turn that off." Then, because God sometimes has a sense of arrangement when human beings fail to, the next line played. "Mom says the fundraiser works better if I wear blue," Noah's voice. From the barn audio Susan had captured with my permission on a second visit. The room broke then. Not chaos exactly. Shock. Sharp voices, chairs scraping. One woman near the front put a hand over her mouth and started crying. A man from the dealership who had sponsored table wine said very loudly, "What the hell?" Rachel looked at Noah, not with shame, with fury. Pure, exposed fury that finally had no place left to hide. And that was when my grandson did the bravest thing I have ever seen. He stepped toward the microphone on his own. Not because we had scripted it. We had not. Arlene later told me that was the moment she stopped seeing a frightened child and started seeing a boy stepping out of a cage while the door was still moving. Noah lifted his chin and said, voice shaking but audible, "I'm not sick," like she said. The room went silent again. He swallowed hard, then said it clearer. "I'm not sick," like she said. "She told me if I told the truth, Grandpa would die and Dad would disappear and everybody would hate me." I do not remember crossing the stage to stand beside him. I only remember being there, one hand hovering near his shoulder without forcing contact, giving him the choice. He leaned half an inch toward me. That was enough. Rachel said in a tone so sharp it almost cut the microphone, "Noah, stop talking." There it was. Not concern, command. Arlene moved then, up the side steps, badge visible now. "No," she said. "He can keep talking if he wants." Rachel stared at the badge, and for the first time all night her face showed something honest. Fear. Mason tried bluster. "What is this, some political stunt?" Mendez answered from the floor as two officers moved in through the side doors. "This is an investigation." You would think the room would have erupted then. It did not. Not right away. Shock holds people still for a strange amount of time, especially wealthy people in formal clothes. Their first instinct is often to pretend reality must still have a schedule. Rachel heard the officers before she fully processed them. Her eyes darted to the nearest exit, then to Mason, then to me, and then she made the mistake that finished her. She said into a live microphone in front of donors, police, child services, my grandson, and half the town's respectable class, "If you ruin this over one stupid game, do you understand what you've done to us?" To us. Not to his health, not to his future, not to trust. To us. Mendez looked up at the stage and said, "That's enough." The officers came the rest of the way then, one toward Mason, one toward Rachel. Mason chose indignation first. Always a bad bet when reality finally arrives. You can't just storm a charity event and humiliate people. "No," Ruth said from below the stage, standing now at last. "You two were already doing that to a child." I don't know if anyone else heard her clearly. I did, and I will love her for that line until one of us is in the ground. Rachel backed away from the officer, then turned to me with tears already ready. Always the tears. "Dad," she said, "please, you know how hard this has been. You know what he was like after the divorce and after the field day and after all the panic. We did what we had to do." That might have worked once, maybe even 2 weeks earlier in my kitchen. But by then, the binder existed. The audio existed. The school file existed. Noah's fear existed in the open air where everyone could see it. So I answered into the microphone because I wanted the room to hear the difference between explanation and truth. "No," I said, "you did what paid." That sentence left the stage like a stone through glass. Mason cursed and tried to pull free. One officer twisted his arm back just enough to end the experiment. Rachel started crying harder. The MC vanished sideways so fast I gained some respect for him. Arlene crouched beside Noah right there on stage. "Do you want to go with me now?" He nodded. Then he looked at me and asked, in a voice that barely carried, but every person at the front tables heard anyway, "Can Dad come now?" Arlene touched his sleeve gently. "Yes," I nodded toward Mendez. She touched her earpiece. 2 seconds later my phone buzzed. "Daniel," I answered on speaker without thinking. "Come in," I said. Those might have been the best 2 words I have ever spoken to another man. Daniel reached the ballroom in under 4 minutes. Longest 4 minutes of my life. In those 4 minutes, the room changed from fundraiser to evidence site. Sponsors whispered furiously. Someone from the club tried to ask about event liability and got stared into silence by Reeves from the DA's office. The officers moved Rachel and Mason to the side wall near the service door. Not cuffed in front of the room at first. That came later. For the moment, they were contained. Rachel kept crying and trying to speak at me. I did not answer. Mason oscillated between threats and disbelief. At one point he said, "This all still came from a kid and a bitter old man." Reeves answered, "Actually, it came from your bookkeeping first." That shut him up for a useful minute. Then Daniel entered. "I wish I could tell you that room saw something sacred and understood it. Most of them were too busy trying to reposition themselves morally around the evening. But I saw it. Noah saw it. And that was enough." Daniel came through the ballroom doors still in work boots and a clean flannel under a winter coat he had not bothered to button. He looked at the officers first, at Rachel second, at me third. Then he saw Noah. Everything else left his face. He did not charge forward, did not grandstand, did not perform fatherhood for the benefit of the room. He just walked to the stage steps and stopped there, waiting. Noah stepped down one riser, then another, then all the way off the stage. For 1 second they stood facing each other while 7 lost years pressed in around them. Then Daniel said very simply, "Hey, buddy." Noah made a sound then, a terrible small sound, not crying exactly, the sound of a child finding the person he was told had become dangerous and discovering the lie doesn't hold when heard up close. He went into his father's arms so fast Daniel almost lost his balance. People cried then, real crying, not Rachel's calibrated version. Mothers at table 9, the dentist's wife, one of the bartenders, the woman who had whispered "I must be proud" earlier, maybe because the room finally saw the whole crime in one image. A child had been taught to fear his own father and body for years, and neither one killed him on contact. I looked away for a second because I had earned the right to witness that moment, but not to center myself inside it. When I looked back, Noah's face was pressed into Daniel's shoulder, and Daniel was crying openly into the boy's hair without trying to hide it. Rachel saw that and did what people like her always do when the script dies. She attacked the emotional bond itself. "He'll destabilize him," she snapped at Arlene. "You can't just hand him over. Daniel always overexcites him." Arlene looked at her like she was something damp found under a sink. "You have no authority over this room anymore." Then the cuffs came out. Not loudly, no dramatic TV click, just metal and procedure. Rachel lost what remained of her posture when the officer touched her wrists. Mason swore. The ballroom murmured, as if the whole building had become a hive disturbed from inside. I stood at the podium one last time while they were let out. The room quieted reluctantly. People still needed instructions. Small-town donors in formal wear do not know what to do when a gala turns into a fraud investigation unless somebody older and grayer tells them. So I told them, "If you gave tonight because you cared about my grandson, thank you. If you gave in years past because you trusted my daughter, I'm sorry. That money is now part of an investigation. As for the gift she expected me to announce tonight." I paused and took out the actual second envelope. "It will still be made, but not to the people who built a life on keeping a healthy child afraid." Then I handed the envelope to Reeves. Inside was my signed commitment establishing the Ellen Mercer Education and Recovery Trust, $150,000. Not to Rachel, not to Mason, not to Mercer Family Advocacy Services, LLC. To a protected trust for Noah's actual schooling, therapy, future housing if he ever wanted it, and nothing that required obedience to access. Co-trustees, Ruth Bartlett and Daniel Cole. Advisory medical sign-off from independent providers only. I had signed it that afternoon. The room did not applaud. Good. It was not an applause moment. It was a correction. Then I added the part that made the revenge complete. And the first $20,000 from tonight's auction proceeds, once legally cleared, will go to a real pediatric heart charity in Ellen Mercer's name, so that actual sick children get what my grandson never needed and should never have had to pretend to. That was the last thing I said from that stage. I stepped down, went to Noah and Daniel, put one hand on each of them, and for the first time in years, no one in that room had the power to tell me my love was dangerous. The night did not end when the ballroom emptied. That is another thing people who love dramatic reveals often misunderstand. Exposure is not closure. It is paperwork, statements, temporary placements, practical clothing, water bottles, evidence bags, and questions asked in rooms that smell like lemon disinfectant and tired carpet. By 11:15, the country club ballroom looked like every failed performance after the audience leaves. Half-cleared plates, wilted centerpieces. Program cards abandoned on tables, auction sheets boxed as evidence. One heel broken under table 12, a champagne flute on its side near the sponsor wall, the giant portrait of Noah taken down and wrapped in a club tablecloth because nobody could figure out whether it counted as personal property, emotional damage, or both. Noah rode home with Daniel and Arlene. Not Rachel. Not me. That decision surprised me for half a second, and then felt exactly right. The first car ride out of captivity should belong to the child in the future, not the old man's need to apologize. I followed in my truck with Ruth. Neither of us spoke for the first 10 minutes. What could we have said? Congratulations on detonating your family in a ballroom? Nice work turning 7 years of fraud into a catering problem? Finally, Ruth took off one heel, rubbed her ankle, and said, "Well, she really did say it all out loud." I laughed then. A short, ugly laugh that turned halfway into something like a sob and then found no home at all. "You all right?" she asked. "No." "Good. Means you're not a sociopath." That helped in the only way Ruth knew how. At my house, Daniel had Noah settled on the living room couch under Ellen's old patchwork quilt. Arlene sat in the armchair with a legal pad and a mug of tea she held without drinking. Susan had come over straight from the gala parking lot and was in the kitchen heating soup because some women meet trauma by feeding it until it becomes manageable enough for language. Noah looked 17 and 7 at the same time. The adrenaline had burned off. What remained was a thin white shock around the eyes. He watched the front door when I came in. Not with fear. Checking. Still here. Still same side. I sat on the coffee table across from him. "Do you want me close or not right now?" That is a useful question. Not because children always know the answer, because it reminds them they are allowed one. He thought about it, then patted the cushion beside him. So I sat. Arlene went through the essentials first. Temporary emergency placement, medical hold on Rachel's access, no unsupervised contact, follow-up interview tomorrow, clothing collection from the house with an officer present, digital devices to be secured, school notification, protective order motion in the morning, Daniel eligible for emergency reunification review pending expedited hearing. She explained everything clearly, not softly. Children hear softness as uncertainty when adults are panicking. Clear is kinder. Noah listened, nodded, asked almost nothing. Then, after a while, he said, "Can I sleep in Grandpa's room?" It took me a second to understand. He meant the downstairs guest room, the little room Rachel had shoved me into because my grief made me movable. "You can sleep anywhere you want tonight," I said. He looked toward the stairs, then back at me. "Not upstairs." Then not upstairs. Daniel asked, "Want me in there too or too much?" Noah looked between us. This was another first. Choice where Rachel used to live. "Both," he said finally. So that is how 3 generations of men ended up sleeping in my downstairs room the night the lie broke. Noah in the twin bed because he needed the wall. Daniel on an air mattress Susan found in the barn. Me in the old recliner from the den dragged into the corner near the radiator. None of us really slept. But we were there, and sometimes the body counts presence before the mind can count healing. Around 2 in the morning, Noah spoke into the dark. "Are they mad?" Daniel answered first. "Probably," I added. "They don't get to matter first tonight." Silence. Then Noah again. "I thought if I told, everything would explode." I looked at the glow of the radiator and said, "Some things needed exploding." Another silence. Then he whispered, "I'm glad it did." That was the first real piece of relief I let myself feel. Morning made everything practical. Officers escorted Daniel and Arlene back to the house by 10 to collect Noah's clothes, school things, medications, and anything else that belonged to him personally. I went too. Not because anyone wanted me there, because I needed to stand in that house while the fiction came off the walls. Rachel was not home. She had spent the night in county holding before arraignment. Mason, too. The farmhouse felt different without their voices in it, not peaceful yet, just stripped, a set after filming. Noah stayed close to Daniel and Arlene as we moved room to room. Every item turned into a small emotional landmine. Jerseys hidden behind winter sweaters, a box of soccer magazine clippings under the bed, drawings of wide-open fields folded inside textbooks, a shoebox full of unsent letters to Daniel, some only 1 sentence long. "Dad, I still remember the fishing knot. Dad, I got taller. Dad, I'm sorry I made you cry. Dad, Mom says I can't mail this because stress is part of your problem too." Daniel found those letters sitting on the floor beside Noah's dresser and had to stop. Not dramatically. He just stopped moving and looked like somebody had stepped through his chest. Arlene quietly took the box and said, "These are his. He can decide when." We found the medication tray too. Blue pills in an orange bottle prescribed years earlier. Refilled through a local family practitioner, Rachel had once convinced to continue stable management pending specialist review. Reeves later tore that doctor apart in deposition. Not because the woman was malicious, because she had been lazy enough to trust maternal narrative over active verification. People talk about villains as if only monsters do damage. Half the time damage gets its passport stamped by convenience. The monitor came down next. Once the nightstand moved and the fake cord showed in full daylight, even Daniel let out a sound halfway between disbelief and nausea. Noah saw this every night, he said. Susan, who had come along to supervise the medication handling, answered quietly. Yes, that was the point. By noon, Noah's room was half emptied, not erased, recovered. Then we went upstairs to what had once been mine and Ellen's room. I had not really stood in that room and looked since before the gala. Not as mine. Not with my own spine. The bed was made, the heated floor warm under my shoes, Rachel's perfume on the dresser, Mason's watch by the lamp, a decorative throw at the foot of the bed with one of those stitched inspirational words women buy when they want guests to think peace is a decor choice. Breathe. I almost tore that pillow in half. Instead, I walked to the closet and opened the far side, where Ellen used to keep winter dresses, and the cedar blocks she swore did more good than mothballs. Rachel had replaced the cedar smell with cosmetics and lavender sachets, and one locked cash box on the upper shelf. Arlene looked at me. Is that yours? No. Then let's open it with a warrant officer. By 3 that afternoon, she had one. Inside the box were more than receipts. There were backup scripts. Not just the winter protocol binder language I had already photographed. Worse, a notebook labeled contingencies. If school nurse pushes, refer to fatigue masking. If father seeks independent eval, trigger episode memory. If grandpa questions numbers, raise Ellen and mortality concerns. If child resists fundraiser, remove sports privileges and increase fear framing. If donor asks cure question, answer with complexity and access gaps. If community interest fades, escalate next winter, consult urgency. Every page a tiny manual for converting concern into compliance. The line about Ellen and mortality concerns made Arlene curse under her breath. I had not heard her curse once up to that point. Somehow that helped, because it meant a professional who had seen a lot still found this vile. Then came the thing that finished whatever part of me still wanted to call Rachel merely broken instead of cruel. At the back of the notebook was a page headed Post-Grandpa Planning, House Conversation After 65 Plus. If he softens around legacy, position lifetime care narrative. Consider room conversion downstairs after transfer complete. Noah can remain dependent longer if home remains central. If he dies before full setup, sympathy window likely increases donor yield short term. I read that line twice, then a third time. If he dies before full setup, sympathy window likely increases donor yield short term. There are moments when disgust strips language down to animal sound. I made one then. Not words, just something low and raw. Daniel took the notebook from me, read the line himself, and had to put a hand flat against the wall. She planned your death into the budget, he said. Yes, that was exactly it. Not feared it, planned it. That page changed the legal case. Reeves said so later. Not because courts care more about dead old men than frightened children, because it proved the fraud was not reactive. It was forward designed. Once the evidence team finished, Noah stood in the upstairs hall looking toward Rachel's room. You want to go in there? I asked. He shook his head. Then after a second, he said, only once. So we did. The room looked like any other adult woman's room after a hurried departure. Jewelry stand, makeup tray, half-open drawer, gown bag from the gala still draped over the chair where she must have changed before being taken out in cuffs. Noah went straight to the nightstand and opened the bottom drawer. From the back, he pulled out a flattened yellow envelope. What's that? Daniel asked. My drawings. Inside were dozens of pictures Noah had made over the years that Rachel never displayed. Not the pale blue hearts and brave boy art she used for donors, the real ones. Soccer fields, fishing docks, a boy on a bike, a man with a toolbox, grandma in the garden, a house with all the windows open. One drawing of me and Noah under the big maple out back with no monitor, no blanket, no couch, just 2 figures standing. On the back of that one, in Rachel's handwriting, was a single note. Too healthy looking. Noah stared at it a long time, then folded the drawing back up and put it in his pocket. That was the moment I think he stopped hoping there had been some secret good reason underneath everything. Not because the medical papers were false, because his own imagination had been curated for optics. He walked out of the room before any of us could speak. Later, back at my house, he sat at the kitchen table and spread those drawings out under the afternoon light, one by one. Like evidence of a self he had smuggled past her in pencil. Susan left that evening only after locking up every medication bottle in a tackle box she took home with her. Arlene filed emergency placement papers. Daniel slept in the den. I stayed up making a list of every repair the farmhouse needed now that I intended never to let Rachel's version of reality live in it again. Not because repairs mattered most, because practical lists kept me from drowning in guilt. The guilt was there anyway. It flared when I saw the old soccer drawings, when Daniel asked what cereal Noah liked because he had missed enough years not to know, when I found Ellen's gardening gloves still hanging by the mudroom, and realized Rachel had used her house, her death, her grandson, and my loneliness as building materials for a fraud that flourished under my own roof. 3 days after the gala, Rachel called from county release under supervised conditions. I almost did not answer. Reeves had warned me she would pivot fast, from tears to accusation, from apology to explanation. Whatever narrative kept oxygen in the lie. I answered because Ruth said sometimes the cleanest revenge is letting a person reveal how little remorse they can manufacture under pressure. Dad? Her voice came thin and rough. County walls scrape varnish off everybody. Yes, a pause. Maybe she expected tenderness just from the word dad still being available. This has gone too far. There it was immediately. Not what I did. Not what happened to Noah. The consequences. I leaned back in my chair, the old kitchen around me. Late afternoon light on the table. Noah upstairs with Daniel trying on cleats. Daniel had bought that morning because the child had outgrown the hidden pair in his closet. That normal sound above me made the conversation easier. No, I said, it went too far years ago. She started crying, or imitating it. By then the distinction no longer interested me. You don't understand what it was like after the divorce. After Mom got sick, after Noah collapsed, everything was chaos. You had choices. I had no support. I almost laughed. No support. From the woman who had converted a town's sympathy into operating capital. You had support, I said. You turned it into revenue. Silence. Then anger, because tears had failed. You think you're so righteous now. Where was this spine when Mom was dying? Where was this clarity when I was the one keeping everything from falling apart? There it was. The old weapon. My shame as leverage. I let her use it once. Not again. You want the truth, I said. My spine should have shown up sooner. You are right about that. But you don't get to use my failure as shelter for yours. She breathed hard into the phone, then tried a new approach. Noah needed management. Noah needed a mother. She made a sound like she had bitten metal. Mason says the accounting can be explained. Mason can explain it to the DA. Dad, don't call me like that if what you mean is witness. Silence. Then very coldly she said, he'll miss me. I looked up at the ceiling, at the floorboards above the kitchen where her room used to be mine, at the whole architecture of my own cowardice and her ambition. Yes, I said, children miss all kinds of dangerous things when that's what raised them. And then I hung up. That was the first time in 7 years I ended a conversation with my daughter, instead of letting her decide how much damage I was allowed to hear. The weeks after the gala unfolded in 2 different timelines. One was legal, measured in filings, hearings, evidence reviews, subpoenas, statements, and the slow grinding dignity of official language. The other was human, measured in breakfasts, doorways, nightmares, school drop-offs, pill-free mornings. A boy learning he could be thirsty, tired, excited, angry, winded, embarrassed, and alive without any of it becoming a diagnosis. The legal timeline moved first in obvious ways. Rachel and Mason were charged with fraud-related offenses, theft by deception, child endangerment, unlawful prescription handling tied to misrepresented need, and a handful of financial crimes. Dennis practically glowed while explaining because numbers finally got to be moral for once. The LLC accounts were frozen. The fundraiser platform records were seized. Sponsor reimbursements and claims were cataloged. The fake telehealth documents became a separate delight for the prosecution because every forged medical letter made the whole house of cards look less like overprotective parenting and more like deliberate enterprise. Mason talked sooner than Rachel. That did not surprise anybody. Men like him often believe loyalty is a service they rent from themselves until the price changes. The moment Reeves showed him the money trail and the audio clips and let him sit quietly with the line "full blue pill if over-talkative" on a printed page, Mason started rediscovering his conscience in exchange for strategic cooperation. His version of events placed Rachel at the center of most of the long design. I believe that. I also believe he enjoyed every dollar and every upgrade right up until handcuffs entered the equation. Both things can be true. Human beings are terribly efficient at sharing evil while still competing to narrate it. Rachel held out longer. She went through 3 versions of defense in under 2 weeks. First came maternal desperation, then administrative misunderstanding, then what Reeves called the complexity argument, which is what guilty educated people use when plain truth starts sounding expensive. She had not lied, exactly. She had simplified. She had protected. She had used imprecise language under stress. The fundraising structure was messy but mission-driven. The medical decisions were cautionary, not exploitative. The child's statements were colored by confusion. The audio was clipped and interpreted without context. All the usual tricks. The problem was context had been seized in boxes. The contingencies notebook, the binder notes, the old medical letters, the unplugged monitor, the LLC, the transfer timing, the custody records, Mason's partial corroboration, Susan's medical review, Karen Belsky's clean exam, the school counselor notes, the drawings hidden because they looked too healthy. And Noah himself, slowly, carefully, telling the truth in layers consistent enough to make every adult in the room sit straighter when he spoke. I did not attend every hearing. That is not noble detachment. That is age and self-preservation. And the fact that a man can only watch his child rearrange morality into self-defense so many times before something permanent inside him starts to dry out. But I attended the emergency custody hearing. That one mattered. Daniel wore a navy suit that fit badly in the shoulders because grief and legal bills do not leave much room for tailoring. I wore the same charcoal suit from the gala. Ruth came with a binder and a face like sharpened patience. Arlene testified, Susan testified, Karen testified by video, the school nurse testified. Even Denise, the principal, testified about the discrepancy between parent narrative and school restrictions. Then Noah spoke in chambers, not in the courtroom. The judge was too sensible for that. But afterward, when everyone filed back in and the judge's expression had changed from cautious professionalism to controlled disgust, I knew enough had landed. Daniel got temporary primary custody with immediate supervised transition support and therapeutic services ordered. Rachel got monitored contact only. No mention of Mason in relation to Noah beyond restricted no-contact conditions. The judge used the phrase manufactured dependency. I remember that exactly because it sounded like a machine getting named after you have been trapped in it. Manufactured dependency. Yes, that was it. When the hearing ended, Daniel sat on the courthouse steps with his elbows on his knees and cried into both hands for a full minute. Not because he had won, because the years finally had language. I sat beside him, not touching, just there. After a while, he said, "I don't know how to be his father at 13 when I got frozen out at 9. I looked out at the parking lot, at the flag, at the county bus stop where two teenagers were laughing over something on a phone with the normal carelessness of people whose bodies have not been turned into lies. You don't do 13 all at once, I said. You do breakfast, then one decent ride to school, then one honest answer when he asks what you missed, then tomorrow." Daniel nodded, then asked, "You think he'll ever forgive me?" The question cut because it mirrored my own. "I think he's going to spend a while learning the difference between who left and who was pushed away," I said. "That won't be clean, but it won't stay impossible." That was probably the best answer either of us had at the time. The human timeline was messier. The first week after the gala, Noah slept badly. A lot of children do after removal from coercive homes. At least that's what the therapist told us. He would wake around 2 or 3 with his hand on his chest, convinced he had forgotten something important enough to kill somebody. Not always a clear thought. Sometimes just panic, a racing pulse, the old habit of scanning for consequence. We learned quickly not to flood him with reassurance. Too much adult urgency felt like danger to him. So we built rituals. Light on, water, feet on the floor, name 5 things in room. 1 hand on stomach, count the breaths. No one says calm down because no one has ever calmed down from hearing calm down. On the 4th night, I heard him in the bathroom throwing up. Daniel got there first. I hovered in the hall because fathers and grandfathers can crowd a frightened child into another kind of prison if they both rush at once. Afterward, Noah came out pale and embarrassed. "Sorry," he said. Daniel answered with the first good sentence I heard him give as an active father again. "We don't apologize for alarms in this house. We answer them." That was a better line than anything I had said in months. We also had to relearn food. Rachel's system had wrapped meals in control. This raises your pressure. This lowers your stamina. This supports regulation. This is too inflammatory. This is too salty. This is too stimulating. Nothing overt enough to look like starvation. Just enough to turn eating into supervised symbolism. So Susan and the therapist both said the same thing. Return food to ordinary life. Pancakes because you want pancakes. Soup because it's cold. Pizza because a teenager asked. Water because you're thirsty, not because a laminated chart commands it. The first time Noah asked for extra syrup and then froze like he had committed an offense, I thought Daniel might start crying into the waffle iron. Then there was the field. Karen had cleared Noah medically with follow-up. The therapist had cleared him psychologically for gradual restoration of ordinary activity. Coach Alvarez, after several tears and one completely justified curse about the whole damn town missing it, invited Noah back without pressure. "No speeches," she said to Daniel and me at the fence. "He comes, he warms up, he leaves if he wants. We don't turn first freedom into performance." Good coach. The first practice back as himself was on a cold Thursday with a wet wind and terrible field conditions. Perfect in a way. No cinematic sunset, no triumphant music, just mud, teenagers, and breath in the air. Noah stood in borrowed training gear because Rachel had thrown out his secret shoes months earlier after finding grass stains on the laces. Coach handed him a ball. Nothing else. No announcement. He set it on the turf and just looked at it. "You can leave it there all day if you want," she said. He almost smiled, then nudged it forward, then again, then once harder. Within 10 minutes he was moving with the others. Awkward at first, then less so. Then with the old hunger I had seen in that first hidden game. He overran the ball once and stopped dead, one hand flying to his chest. All of us at the fence went still. Then he stayed upright, breathed, looked at Karen, who had come just for that first practice because she understood what bodies remember. She gave him a tiny nod. He put his hand down, kept going. I cannot fully describe what that moment did to me. Maybe because it was not just joy, it was grief too. For every time he could have done that at 8, at 9, at 10, at 11, at 12, freedom always arrives carrying the years it was denied. The house had its own timeline of repair. After the evidence teams cleared the upstairs, I stood in what used to be mine and Ellen's bedroom and made myself do the ugly practical work first. Strip the bed, bag the clothes Rachel had left, box Mason's watches, chargers, and shoes for legal retrieval. Remove the stupid decorative pillow that said breathe and throw it so hard into the trash bin outside that it split a seam. Then I opened the windows, all of them. Late autumn air flooded the room. Cold, honest, unscented, no perfume, no lavender sachet cover-up, just air. I hired painters the next week. Not because the walls needed color, because they needed witness. Fresh paint is one of the cleanest ways to tell a room its previous story does not own it anymore. I put the old oak bed back where Ellen liked it, brought her reading chair in from storage, moved my boxes out of the downstairs guest room, returned my shirts to my closet, hung Ellen's quilt over the cedar chest where it had belonged before Rachel treated the room like an inheritance preview. The heated floors stayed. I considered tearing them up on principle. Ruth called that idiot grief. She was right. Heat does not become immoral because bad people enjoyed it. So I kept the floors and hated that she was right again. The more difficult room was Noah's. Not because of physical things, because of absence. The fake monitor was gone, the pill tray gone, the blue event jackets packed as evidence or donated or burned in my mind, though I never checked which. But the indent in the carpet where the nightstand sat remained. The habit of low voices remained. The feeling of surveillance remained. He would not sleep there even after the house was legally mine again, so I did not ask him to. Not once. Instead, over winter, that room became a study with a long table for homework, 2 beanbag chairs, and shelves for the books he actually liked, instead of the saintly ones Rachel staged in photos. Dinosaurs, soccer biographies, space books. A weird phase of survival manuals Daniel encouraged for reasons that made perfect sense once you knew what the child had survived. When Noah first came back into that room months later and saw it changed, he stood in the doorway a long time. "It doesn't feel like me in here anymore," he said. I almost apologized, then realized that was good. "It doesn't have to," I said. "You get to decide what comes next." He walked in, touched the table, looked at the shelves. Then he said, "Can we put Grandma's chair back in the corner? Not for reading, just because she liked watching rain from there." So we did. That was how healing worked around us. Not as one clean arc, as 1,000 decisions where the child finally got to be consulted. The town's reaction was what you would expect from a place small enough to remember whose mother sang alto at funerals 20 years ago. First shock, then gossip, then moral realignment. People who had donated wanted to know if they had been stupid. People who had praised Rachel wanted to know if being fooled made them complicit. People who had always found something off made sure everybody heard they had always found something off. I had no patience for any of it. At church the first Sunday after the gala, 3 different people tried to tell me they were praying for everybody involved. The third one got a sharper answer than she deserved. "Pray for Noah," I said. The adults had plenty of chances already. That became my rule for a while. If a conversation drifted toward Rachel's stress, Mason's background, my heartbreak as a father, or the tragedy of appearances, I pushed it back toward the boy. Not because my heartbreak was fake, because heartbreak in adults had spent enough years collecting sympathy while the child paid the bill. Then came Christmas. The gala had been in late November. By Christmas, the house felt both fuller and stranger. Daniel and Noah came over Christmas Eve afternoon with a pie. Daniel admitted he bought because baking was not one of his gifts, and a box of ornaments Noah had found in Rachel's attic stash. Real ornaments from before. Preschool clay stars. A wooden train Ellen painted with him when he was 4. A little felt soccer ball Rachel had never put out. We decorated the tree in the living room slowly. At one point, Noah held up the soccer ornament and said, "She told me this one was too much of a trigger." Daniel and I just looked at each other. Then I took the ornament and hung it dead center, where you could not miss it from any chair in the room. "There," I said. "It can trigger the whole house if it wants." That got a real laugh out of him. Quick, unplanned, perfect. Later, after dinner, Noah fell asleep on the couch with his feet in Daniel's lap and Home Alone playing low on the television because some traditions deserve better adults than they got the first time. I stood in the kitchen rinsing plates when Ruth came up beside me and said, "You know what your revenge actually was?" I kept rinsing. Gala, microphone, public collapse, trust, police, I can think of a few parts. She shook her head. No, those were tools. The revenge was that she built her whole life around controlling the child, the father, and the story. And now the child is with his father. The father talks to you again, and the story belongs to evidence instead of her. I dried a plate slowly. That was better than my version, which is one reason I keep Ruth around. Still, there was one final scene I had not expected. Rachel wrote to me from county release housing in February. Not a text, not a message through counsel, a real handwritten letter on lined paper. It began the way manipulative letters often do, with just enough humility to lower your guard. I know you probably hate me. Not because that is the deepest truth, because it forces you into the role of the judge and lets the writer pretend she is already facing consequences bravely. The letter went on for 4 pages. She had been overwhelmed, lonely, scared, abandoned by Daniel, stretched thin by my grief after Ellen, pressured by money. Mason's influence had been bad. The medical world had been confusing. Noah had always been more fragile emotionally than anyone understood. One lie became another because turning back became impossible. She never meant for it to get this big. She loved him. She loved me. She knew she had made mistakes. She hoped someday I would remember she was still my daughter. I read it twice, not because it moved me, because I wanted to see whether any sentence in 4 pages put Noah's experience at the center instead of her shame. One did. Only one. I regret that Noah got pulled into adult complexity. Pulled into, as if he had tripped over it accidentally instead of being trained inside it on purpose. I showed the letter to Ruth. She handed it back after one reading and said, "That woman could watch a house fire and write from the perspective of the match." I did not answer Rachel. Maybe someday that will be judged as hardness. I can live with that. Forgiveness is not the same thing as reopening the door to a person who still narrates harm as weather. What I did do was put the letter in a file box with the other pieces of the case. Not because it mattered legally, because it mattered morally. I wanted a record of how far self-pity can travel without once becoming accountability. Spring came slowly that year. Good. We needed slow. Noah grew 1/2 inch and 2 shoe sizes between February and May, like his body had been waiting for permission. He gained color, started eating like a boy instead of a display, argued about homework, rolled his eyes at Daniel twice in 1 week, which made both of us secretly happy, because normal family irritation sounds a lot like recovery when you have been living inside scripted fragility. He still had hard days. Therapy peeled things back, sometimes too fast. He would realize some new corner of the lie and go quiet for hours. A fundraiser photo, a church memory, a birthday party he skipped because Rachel said excitement could trigger an event. A note he once wrote to Daniel and then destroyed because Rachel told him male stress affected fathers' hearts too. Every recovered truth carried its own grief. But grief in the open is better than fear in a locked room, even when the room has no lock and the door was technically always there. By summer, the legal case had enough shape that even the town gossips started using words like conviction exposure and plea leverage, as if they had all secretly gone to law school between church and Costco. Mason took a deal first. Again, not surprising. He admitted to fraudulent diversion of charitable funds, acknowledged knowing the child illness narrative was false in material respects, and confirmed he had helped maintain the public system because, in his own infuriating phrase, once the train was moving, it seemed stupid not to ride it. That sentence made Reeves so happy he almost grinned in a courtroom. Juries hate cheerful parasites. Mason handed the prosecution one in his own language. Rachel held on longer. Her attorney tried for diminished judgment under prolonged caregiver stress, tried for shared blame with Mason, tried for administrative sloppiness, tried for maternal overreach, if you can imagine such a bloodless phrase being asked to carry what she had done. The state answered with the notebook, the binder, the audio, the school records, the false signatures, the fake monitor, the benefit accounting, and Noah. Not Noah on a witness stand in the theatrical way people picture. The court used recorded forensic interview statements, psychological expert interpretation, and carefully limited direct testimony because Arlene had already decided this child would not pay again in performance labor for adult wrongdoing. I thanked God for that more than once. When Rachel finally entered her plea, I was there. Not because I wanted to see my daughter broken. That fantasy had mostly died in the months since the gala. Revenge had already done what it needed to do. What remained was accounting. She stood in county court in a gray jacket with her hair pulled back hard and answered yes to questions about fraudulent representation, financial theft, and endangerment through coercive medical and emotional misrepresentation. The language was ugly, clinical, necessary. At one point, the judge asked whether she understood that she had knowingly maintained false dependency conditions around her child for financial and relational control. Rachel said yes. That yes did not feel satisfying, just final. I think people who have not lived through family betrayal imagine the moment of legal admission as some bright emotional conclusion. It is not. It is a door closing in a building you wish had never been built. After the plea, her attorney asked whether I would consider reading a victim statement at sentencing. I said I would think about it. Ruth said I absolutely should. Daniel said only if it helped me, not because anyone owed the court poetry. Noah said nothing at all. But 3 days later, he left a note on my kitchen counter while I was outside fixing the gate latch. You should tell them about the pretending. Just that. not tell them about the money, not about your heart, not about grandma. The pretending. He was right. So at sentencing, I stood up and told the court what manufactured dependency actually cost in ordinary life. Not just dollars, though I named those. Not just the house, though I named that too. Not just the fake treatments and public fundraising and controlled pills. I told them about the bike Noah never learned to ride at 8 because his mother said a fall could trigger a cardiac crisis. About the school field trips he declined before other children could invite him. About the couch photos, the church prayers, the hidden drawings, the soccer ornament not allowed on the tree because it looked too alive, the nights he apologized for his own fear, the way he asked whether telling the truth would kill me, the years Daniel lost, the way Ellen had seen something wrong and died before she could press the point hard enough to save him. Then I said the one sentence I'd been carrying from the start. My daughter did not just steal money. She stole ordinary life in small daily pieces and taught a child to thank her for the theft. The room was silent when I sat down. Rachel cried during sentencing. Real tears, maybe. By then, I no longer measured them. She received prison time, restitution, supervised post-release conditions, permanent restrictions on unsupervised contact with Noah unless therapeutic benchmarks were met and he consented when older, and separate financial penalties tied to the diverted fundraiser money. Mason got less time, but enough. Neither outcome gave Noah a childhood back. They were never going to. Law can stop a machine. It cannot return what the gears already ate. By then, though, life in my house had begun sounding like life again. The downstairs guest room stopped being mine alone because Noah liked doing homework at the little desk there when storms rolled in. He said the radiator knocking sounded like a patient old robot trying to tell stories. Only a 13-year-old could make that sentence and somehow improve the room with it. Daniel and I built new routines without pretending missing years could be solved by enthusiasm. He moved into a rental 8 minutes away instead of taking Noah back to his old apartment across county lines. That was deliberate. Too much change too fast can feel like another form of instability after coercive homes. So for the first year, we shared a lot. School pickups, dinners, therapy runs, soccer, quiet weekends. Not because the court required it, because Noah's nervous system needed continuity more than either man needed to prove ownership. There were awkward moments, many. The first time Daniel tried to enforce a curfew and Noah snapped, "You don't get to act like you were always here." The whole kitchen went silent. Daniel went white around the mouth. I almost stepped in, then did not, because the truth belonged to them first. Daniel took a breath and said, "You're right. I don't get to act like that. I get to act like I'm here now." That was the right answer. Simple. No defense brief, no guilt performance, just present tense. Another time, Noah asked me in the truck whether I still loved Rachel. The road ran out toward the feed mill, June fields on both sides, windows down, dust and warm air. "Yes," I said after a while. He looked out the passenger side. "Is that bad?" "No, why not?" "Because loving someone doesn't make what they did less ugly. It just means the ugly thing cost more." He thought about that, then nodded once. I think children deserve answers that do not force them to choose moral simplicity just to protect adult comfort. By August, Noah had his own bike, secondhand Trek, blue frame, a little big for him but not for long. Daniel found it on a classifieds page. I replaced the brake lines because habits die hard and because sometimes old men say I love you with cable housing and wrenches. The first ride was in my driveway, then the lane, then out to the mailbox and back. No monitors, no symptom chart, no parent timing his pulse with panic in her eyes. Just a boy wobbling, correcting, laughing, falling once into the ditch grass, getting back up, and riding again. When he finally coasted the whole stretch without swerving, he shouted, "Did you see that?" I shouted back, "The county probably heard it." He laughed so hard he nearly tipped. I went inside afterward and cried in the mudroom where Ellen's gloves still hung, because some victories come so late they bruise the joy that carries them. School that fall was its own kind of revelation. Noah joined classes full-time without medical accommodations beyond ordinary support. No special restroom, no parent-generated emergency folder. No secret signal to the nurse, just school. Locker sticking sometimes. Math too early. One history teacher who assigned too much reading and thought it built character. Friends. Real ones, not the careful visitors Rachel curated around the image of fragility. He made junior varsity soccer. Not because the story needed sentimental perfection, because he was already good and had been practicing in secret for years. Coach Alvarez cried when he got the jersey and then blamed the wind despite being indoors. His first official game under his real life was away at Gettysburg Middle. I stood on metal bleachers between Daniel and Susan with a thermos of coffee and no idea where to put my hands. The whistle blew. Noah ran, not hidden now, not behind the gym, not in secret conditioning minutes squeezed between lies, out in the open, under lights, in school colors, name on the back, breath free. He was not the best player on the field. That mattered to me for some reason. If he had been miraculous, the whole thing would have risked turning symbolic instead of real. No. He was 13. Good touch, great field sense, a little cautious near contact, still learning his body in public. In the second half, he took a through ball down the left side and crossed clean into the box. Assist, not goal. Daniel stood so fast he spilled coffee on his own shoe. Susan whooped. I laughed at both of them. Noah glanced toward the stands and saw us all on our feet. Then he grinned. No fear, no apology, no checking his own pulse because joy had become suspicious. Just a grin. That grin is worth more to me than every cent Rachel stole. By winter, the trust in Ellen's name was functioning exactly as I wanted. Therapy covered, education secure, college later if Noah wanted it, trade school if he didn't, housing support if life got expensive. No access contingent on compliance, no management disguised as care, no one permitted to use illness language as a leash. I rewrote my will too. Not vindictively, cleanly. The farmhouse stays in trust until I'm gone, with the option for Noah to decide later whether he wants it, sell it, or turn it into something else entirely. Ruth supervises if I go first. Daniel gets residential priority if Noah is still a minor. No hidden clauses, no moral tests, no little traps disguised as wisdom from beyond the grave. I had spent enough of my life inside other people's conditional language. One snowy Saturday in January, Noah and I were cleaning out the hall cabinet where Rachel used to keep her fake binders. Most of them were gone to evidence by then. What remained was ordinary family clutter, coupons, old menus, church bulletins, a dead flashlight, a birthday candle bag. In the back, we found one of Ellen's recipe cards curled at the corner. Chicken pot pie, her handwriting, blue ink, grease stains shaped like a crescent moon. Noah smiled. This one tasted like home. I looked at him. Tasted. He shrugged. A lot of stuff in the last few years tasted like plans. That sentence stopped me cold, because he was right again. Care had been curated. Food had tasted like narrative. Room temperature had tasted like strategy. Even breath had been managed. That night we made Ellen's pot pie exactly as written, even though her crust instructions were always too confident and never allowed enough flour on the counter. Daniel chopped carrots badly. Noah stole peas from the cutting board. I burned my hand on the pan edge because memory can make old men stupid. We ate at the kitchen table with all the windows fogged from heat and snow pushing against the dark outside. At one point, Noah set his fork down and said, "Grandma would hate all this." I smiled sadly. She would hate the reason for it. She'd like the dinner. He thought about that, then nodded. I wish she could see me now. I looked at his face in that warm kitchen light. More color, more mischief. A scar on his knee from the ditch fall off the bike. One sock half off because no child who is healing should ever be completely tidy. She saw enough to know you were worth fighting for, I said. That is the line I chose to believe. Maybe because I need it. Maybe because it is true. Sometimes those are the same thing. A year after the gala, the country club ballroom hosted another winter charity event. Not ours, never ours again. The Ellen Mercer Education and Recovery Trust had no interest in glamorous pity. We did our giving quietly after that. Local school sports equipment, therapy scholarship, actual pediatric cardiac unit support where real families sat under real fluorescent lights getting real news. On the anniversary of the gala, I did not go near the country club. Instead, I drove to Noah's semifinal game in a sleeting rain that made everybody in the stands look vaguely punished by God and adolescence at once. Daniel sat beside me in a hooded coat. Ruth brought hand warmers and judgment for the referee. Susan wore a poncho that made her look like an angry blueberry. The field was a mess. Mud, wind, white lines smearing under cleats. Perfect. Because real life does not wait for cinematic weather when it finally decides to become honest. Late in the second half tie game, Noah got loose near the top of the box. One defender on him, another closing. He took the touch left, slipped once, recovered, and drove the shot low off the far post and in. The sound from our bleachers was not elegant. No string music, no healing montage, just people shouting in ugly winter voices because a boy had scored a goal and life, at least for that second, had the decency to be obvious. He turned toward the stands in the rain, hands half raised, grin flashing through sleet, and I thought of the first time I saw him run, hidden, terrified. Looking at me like truth itself was dangerous. Now here he was, visible, cold, alive, not careful in the ways Rachel required. Careful only in the ways sports require. Body, ball, timing, field. He pointed at us after the goal. Not one person. All of us. Me, Daniel, Ruth, Susan. The small, strange rescue family built from blood, old friendship, guilt, persistence, and the one thing Rachel had underestimated from the beginning, that the people she manipulated might eventually stop being embarrassed by their own love and turn it into action. On the drive home after the win, Noah sat in the back seat smelling like rain and mud and effort. "Grandpa," he said, "yeah. You know what the best part is? The goal." No. He leaned forward between the seats. "That nobody looks scared when I'm happy anymore." I had to pull over for a second after that because the windshield blurred and age was not the only reason. When we got home, I went through the mudroom and touched the kitchen doorway without stopping my hand halfway. Then I stood in Ellen's kitchen. With the house warm around me and Noah upstairs yelling something to Daniel about hot chocolate ratios, and I understood the final shape of revenge. It was not Rachel in cuffs, though she earned them. It was not the ballroom, though she deserved the microphone turned against her. It was not even the money rerouted away from her hands, though that mattered. The real revenge was simpler and far more complete. She built her power on fear. Now the child laughs loudly in this house. She built her image on sacrifice. Now the truth of her work sits in public record under her own name. She built her future on my death and Noah's dependency. Now my home is protected, my will is clean, and the boy she tried to freeze into weakness runs in cleats through sleet with his father shouting from the stands. That is revenge an old man can live with. Not because it hurts enough, because it heals in the right direction. And if you ever find yourself wondering how a family lie grows so large that decent people start serving it dinners and writing checks to keep it warm, the answer is this. It grows one postponed question at a time. Ask sooner. Look closer. And if a child ever whispers the truth to you like it might explode in his mouth, believe him before the adults in the room have time to translate it. I nearly learned that too late. Noah did not. That is why this story has an ending I can still live inside.